Hey, we have a Patreon chock full of NSFW content. Audios, GIFs, sauces, captions and more in our Patreon. Most of the audios are free, however, everything else will cost you. I want to grow Story into an actual brand business. An actual animation, publishing, movie studio. So if even you follow our Patreon for free, it'll really help out. Episode 1 New Game. On my 30th birthday, I died. It was a heart condition I was born with. I'd been in and out of the children's hospital all my childhood, going through multiple surgeries. Don't feel too sorry for me, though. I lived a lot longer than the doctors initially thought, actually. I also had a wonderful family. My parents were always supportive of me, and even though I had this medical condition, they taught me to keep my chin up and have respect for myself and for others. I had a younger sister too, 3 years my junior. 3 months before I died, when I collapsed from the first of the heart failures that would eventually lead to my death. It was my sister that gave me the old Game Boy that she and I played with in our childhood. To keep me entertained in the hospital, she said. Thanks, sis. Thus I spent the last weeks of my life playing Pokémon, first in Kanto region games, and the Fire Red remake. I was never a fan of the following generations, even Gold and Silver. Then, my heart gave out on my 30th birthday. I felt my consciousness falling slowly but deeply into the darkness that would transition me to whatever afterlife that awaited me. In the darkness I waited for some time, I think, because when you're a bodiless soul, time is a bit different. I awaited heaven, I hoped, or hell, I don't feel like I deserve this, or something. But nothing happened for a while. Then eventually, I heard a male voice. Hello, there. General Kenobi? Just kidding. But it was a male voice, a middle-aged man's voice I had never heard before. It was gentle, a sincere greeting. Was this Jesus? God? Oh, thank God. Then he said, "Welcome to the world of Pokémon." Mod. I'm pretty sure God just said welcome to the world of Pokémon. I tried to speak, but of course, I had no body, no vocal cords to use. God went on, "My name is OAK. People call me the Pokémon Professor." Then it hit me. Oh my God. What the F? And even as this thought was going through my head, he asked, "Are you a boy or a girl?" I instinctively thought a boy, as I was in my past life, and he moved on to "What is your name?" And before I could think of anything else, he said, "So your name is Ash." He didn't wait much before moving on to "This is my grandson blah blah blah." I think this is when I passed out, as best a bodiless soul reborn into a video game afterlife could pass out. Episode 2 Mom. Wake up, son, my mom said, gently tapping me on the shoulder. Time to get up. So I hadn't died after all. It was just a weird dream because I was playing Pokémon too much in the hospital bed. Oh thank God, Mom, I said, turning towards her, rubbing my eyes. I had the weirdest dream. Who are you? I sat up, shouting. A lady I'd never seen in my life was smiling at me with confusion. Your mom, silly. But she wasn't. And my voice. My voice. Why was it so high-pitched? I tested my voice. A boy's voice. A 10-year boy's voice. Oh my God. I'm still dreaming. No, this is not a dream. I touched my face. A small face, with a smooth baby skin. And my hair was not as thick and bushy as I knew it to be. I looked down at my arms and legs. A boy's body. Oh no, this couldn't be real, could it? But the evidence was all there. I was somehow put in the body of a small boy. I looked around the room. My bed was in the corner, and in the middle of the room there was an old TV with a SNES attached to it. A staircase at the far corner of the room was leading downstairs. I looked behind me to see an old desktop and a pot of palm-looking plant in the opposite corner. My mom looked at me funny while I was inspecting the room, then finally tousled my hair. "Happy birthday! You're 10 now, and you have to get started on your Pokémon journey." I've always been an analytical and rational person in my life. I had time to put my brain to work while my mom was preparing breakfast downstairs. For some reason, by some power of God or trick of the devil, my afterlife was in the Pokémon world. Not only that, but I was probably Ash or Red, the main character of the first-gen Kanto region Pokémon world. I tried the old cliché routine of pinching myself and even slapped myself a few times hard to see if I'd wake up. No dice. I had to come to terms with the fact that this was my life now, no matter how it happened. I felt the need to use the bathroom, so I went. There was a door leading to one in my room, and it occurred to me that there was no such thing as bathrooms in the original game. So this isn't just like the Pokémon game. My consciousness is not just taking a backseat ride through a 2D pixel art game, but we're living, breathing people, with biological needs to eat and relieve ourselves. Interesting. I wasn't 100% sure how this would play out, but I had no choice but to go with it. My mom must have come up to the room while I was taking a shower, because I found some clothes laid out for me on the bed. It was the outfit which we've all seen Ash Ketchum wear in the Pokémon animation series. Jeans, a black t-shirt, a blue vest, and even a pair of green fingerless gloves. I went downstairs to find a wonderful breakfast of pancakes, eggs, and sausages laid out for me on the dining table. At first, I was skeptical of what they would taste like, given that this was supposed to be a video game world, but they were actually really tasty. My new mom was a great cook. And I teared up a bit, remembering my old mom, my real mom, from my previous life. My previous family. "Are you all right, dear? Is something the matter?" my Pokémon World mom asked with genuine, loving concern, and this warmed my heart. Suddenly, I felt something weird in my head. I definitely had memories of my previous life, before I died, but my memories of that childhood were mixed with the memories of me, as Red. It must have been triggered when I was having a conversation with my Pokémon World mom, because all of a sudden I felt genuine love for this person, as if I had known her my entire life. "I'm all right, Mom," I said, smiling. "This is some good food." "Thank you." She smiled and poured me a glass of orange juice. We enjoyed the breakfast in silent happiness. Then, I suddenly had a thought. "Mom, do I have to go on my Pokémon journey? Can't I just stay here with you? What if I don't want to be a Pokémon trainer?" Mom looked a bit surprised. "Well, I mean you don't have to, dear," she said. "But are you sure? You've been talking about this for months, about how you're excited to finally leave Pallet Town and explore the world? Catch and train Pokémon?" She was right. I mean, I guess I had the option of staying here, but if there is some higher power had placed me in this Pokémon world, and Pokémon were real, why the heck would I not go on a Pokémon journey? I had to proceed. If this world wanted me to be the main character, then I had to play the game. Literally. Alright, I just had some last thoughts, that's all. "Now I think it's time for me to go, Mom," I said, getting up from the breakfast table. She gave me a smile. "This is your birthday present, son. A brand new backpack." She handed me the backpack, already packed for the journey. It was actually really sturdy and nice. She opened the compartments and showed me all the things inside. There were considerably more than what you'd find in the first Pokémon game, since I had to actually live and survive by myself out there in the world. There was much more practical stuff like clothing, food, etc. It was a relief. I can't believe that in the original show, everyone was just okay with the fact that a mom kicked her 10-year-old son out into the world without any adult supervision. Weird. She also gave me a wallet. It was a Velcro wallet with bright yellow neon lining, fit for a 10-year-old. It had a P on it that I assumed stood for Pokémon. It was a glorious thing. And more glorious were bills of Poke dollars inside. "It's 50,000 Poke dollars," she said. "If you need more, you know what to do." Sorry, Mom. Remind me what to do again? She laughed and explained how I could call her and she can transfer more money, and this could be done at any Pokémon Center. Right. With all this done, and lots of hugs and kisses from my mom, I headed out the door and into Pallet Town. Episode 3: Pallet Town. In the house, I wasn't really sure what Pallet Town would look like, whether it'd have the game layout of just 4 buildings for a town, or whether it'd be more like from the animation series, with a rich layout of an actual rustic town. I'm glad it was the latter. I'm sure it isn't like any other town that I would know, since this world isn't the one from my previous life. The economics and interactions of townships would behave completely different, especially with the existence of Pokémon. Oh my god! Pokémon! Suddenly I became very excited. This world had Pokémon. I could catch, train, and interact with real Pokémon. Oh god, what would they look like? My heart started to beat more quickly. I started to look around in excitement, but I couldn't see any other residential houses. It didn't take long before I realized what I needed to do. I needed to head north, towards Route 1, upon entering which Professor Oak was supposed to stop me, take me back to his lab, and give me my very own starter Pokémon. Now I was giddy with excitement. I looked back at my house and saw Mom still standing there, waving at me and smiling. "Hey, Mom! Which way's north?" I shouted. She pointed to the direction directly opposite of where the front door was facing. Of course. Directly towards the back of the house. How could I not have guessed? And that means... there it was. To the right of my house, across the street, was another just like mine, but noticeably better. Richer. Gary's house. I smiled at the predictability of this world. The big pieces were definitely based off of the game that I knew and loved. I waved at my mom and started to walk on the road, towards Route 1, and saw, maybe a few hundred yards down the dirt road, the entrance to a more bushy and forest-white area. That must be it. I was already thinking about what my starter Pokémon should be when a thought occurred and stopped me dead in my tracks. What version am I in? I realized that this was of tremendous importance. Depending on the version of the original Kanto region Pokémon game, I could have the choice between the 3 starter Pokémon, or I could get a Pikachu? That's so lame. I mean, no offense to Pikachu lovers and Pikachu itself, and even I myself like the friendship between Ash and Pikachu from the animation series, but as a starter Pokémon? That's definitely not bound to be my first choice of Pokémon. I didn't know what to do, but I've always been the kind of person to assess the situation before making any decisions. I did a 180 and started walking south. Here's why. Normally, in the games, Professor Oak wouldn't be in the lab at this point, and you'd have to try to walk out of Pallet Town to the north when he'd interrupt you and bring you to his lab. In his lab, then, he'd give you the first pick of 3 starter Pokémon. Or, if this weird afterlife was the yellow version after all, he'd give you a Pikachu. I wasn't going to let things go this way if I could help it. I walked for about 5 minutes and I could already see, to the left ahead of me, a big, industrial-looking building. It had to be Professor Oak's lab. I didn't see anyone on the road or outside of the building. Just to be safe, I went around the back of the building and snuck up to the east side, where I could easily peek in the windows. It was easy to be stealthy in the body of a small 10-year-old boy. There were a few younger men and women in lab coats, walking about near the only entrance to the lab. They were using the computer, occasionally referring to paper publications. And, to the back of the lab, no professor, as was expected, but… aha! There he is! Gary, my supposed rival, the super-arrogant, self-absorbed fool that creepily followed you throughout the whole journey. He had the whole spiky bushy hair and everything. Good, he hasn't noticed me sneaking around. It was important to note that he was there, but more importantly, between him and the window I was peeking in through there were 3 Pokeballs. Laid in a row on a lab table like merchandise displayed in an Apple store. So it wasn't yellow version, after all, thank God. It was the original first-gen Kanto game that topped the must-have toy lists of the late 90s, early 2000s era. I remembered, literally a lifetime ago, the playground debates of whether red version or the blue version was better. And the crazy times battling one another using connection cords, etc. Good times. I caught myself smiling at the 3 Pokeballs, forgetting for a minute that I had actually died and this was a weird afterlife. I could actually touch them. Professor Oak would ask me to choose one. I wondered what Bulbasaur, Squirtle, and Charmander would look like in real life. I even remembered a conversation I had with a friend in the past life, saying how awesome it would be if you could start the game with all 3 starters. Wait, what? Why don't I do just that? It's not like the Pokeballs are under lock and key, hidden away in a safe, or stored on the PC like they are in this world. They're just out there, right there on the lab table. And I didn't know where Oak was at this moment, but I hadn't seen him nearby, and assumed he must be near Route 1, waiting for me or Gary. And if Oak wasn't here, well then, who was to stop me from taking the Pokeballs? Oh, this was too good. Too good. At first, being born again into this 10-year-old boy's body was weird and scary. It's only been a few hours, and I missed my real family, my family from my previous life. I wanted to hug my parents and my sister one more time. I also wanted to say proper goodbyes to my friends, have one final pint of beer with them. And when the memories of this body started mixing with my real memories, it was weird, like waking up from a very lucid dream. But when I thought about what being in this body in this world meant, the more excited I got. First of all, as far as I could tell, I had a healthy body. When I was 10 in my previous life, I was going in for regular checkups at the children's hospital to make sure my heart was doing okay. It was stressful for my entire family, and it was scary. Now, I'm not only healthy, but also free. Free to roam in this world. It didn't have a regular school for kids, or any other institutions that I needed to go to. As far as I could tell, my only obligation was to catch and train Pokémon. And if it wasn't already really awesome that I was in this Pokémon world, I was apparently the protagonist of the original game. Things would supposedly work around my actions, and Gary just standing there waiting for his grandpa, Professor Oak, instead of taking the sweet starter Pokémon for himself was good enough for me. I had to act before he started to garner interest in them. ANDDDDDD. If it wasn't already super effing awesome that I was the protagonist in this Pokémon world, I was also still me, the me from my previous life. Armed with the intellect and experience of a 30-year-old man who, despite having a genetic heart condition that cut his life short, had otherwise lived a normal life. I went through school, university, and even had a job. I had knowledge of a whole other world that transcended this one. After all, it was people from this other world that created this one. This made me very excited, dissipating any anxiety I had about being in this body and in this world. I was going to become a freaking Pokémon master. Episode 4 Starter Pokémon. When I played the original red and blue versions, I played to complete the story, not to complete the Pokédex. Like most people, I played through to catch the legendary birds, defeat the Elite Four, Gary, catch Meowth, defeat Elite Four and Gary again, and then moved on to other games. I might have battled a friend or two, but that's about it. My favorite part of the game, therefore, was not catching every single Pokémon out there, but grinding levels up on the rare, strong Pokémon. Then obliterating NPCs in battle with one-hit knockouts due to the stats difference. I felt like a god. I figured, if I'm going to achieve this, in this real, physical world, then I was going to have to get a leg up, a head start. I was going to use my fourth wall knowledge to gain every advantage. And the first goal was to get all 3 starters. I wasn't about to run into Oak, only to have him offer me just one Pokémon, then have Gary pick the exact counter to my pick. Like a douche, this was actually my chosen nickname for Gary when I played the games. Douche. Haha, don't judge me. Even if I straight up asked Oak to give me all 3, I was sure he would say that I was being greedy, or that Gary also needed one, blah blah blah, and therefore just reject me. But if I were to steal them, and pass it off as a mistake of a 10-year-old child? What are they gonna do? Call Officer Jenny? So here's the situation, there were 3 of Professor Oak's aides in the front of the lab building. They seemed to be quite busy with their work, and their line of sight to the lab table with the Pokeballs seemed to be obstructed by the bookcases, so as long as I kept to the blind spots, they couldn't see me take anything. The problem was Gary. He was too close to the lab table, and he would definitely see me take the Pokeballs. If only there was a way to distract him somehow. Geez, he wasn't even pacing the room. I have to admit, he was damn patient for a 10-year-old. That cocky son of a... wait. Cocky. He was the cockiest, most arrogant character in the entire game. Even after you beat him in every battle in the game, he's still cocky, never coming to terms that the main character could beat him, could be better than him. Aha! I had an idea. I walked around to the front of the lab, and pushed open the door as naturally as I could. One of the professor's aides looked up at me from his computer screen, but only for a second, and then went back to his work. Similar reactions from the other 2 aides. I smiled when they looked at me, but didn't say anything. I acted like I belonged there, walking to the back of the lab, where Gary and the Pokeballs were. And there he was. Gary, up close, looked less like the cool kid that was designed to be the protagonist's rival in the game. He just seemed like a kid to me. But then again, so was I. Especially in Gary's eyes, I was the uncool kid, the kid that would never measure up to him. And as if to confirm this. Yo! Gramps isn't here, Gary said, in the utterly condescending tone only he could muster. I turned on my act. I gotta play the naive and inferior 10-year-old he expects me to be. I didn't tell you I took drama for 4 years in high school in my previous life, did I? Oh no, I see, I stuttered on purpose. That's too bad. I put on my most helpless face. Gary took the bait. What's the matter? Already afraid I'm going to get all the gym badges before you? Wait, do you even know what Pokémon gyms are? Ha ha ha. Perfect. Time to reel him in. I was going to go off on my Pokémon journey, but when I got near the north edge of town, I was attacked by a monster. It looked like a rat, but it was much bigger and had really big, sharp teeth. I think it was one of those Pokémons. Gary bursted out laughing, mockingly. Perfect. Pokémons? Pokémons? Ha ha ha, you idiot. It's Pokémons. And the one you saw is called a Rattata. I put on my best, very impressive face. Wow, Gary, you know so much. I was afraid he might call me out on overacting, but he didn't. Of course I do, I know everything there is to know about Pokémon. Definitely more than you. Oh, only if you knew. Oh, yes, of course, I acted flustered. Anyways, I didn't know what to do, so I ran back here, looking for Professor Oak. But I see he isn't here. Oh geez, I guess we both have to wait for him here, since we can't do anything about that big ratatata, or whatever you said it was. We are so helpless. There. I threw my dice. I didn't know how Gary would react to this. What did you just say? Gary shouted in anger. What do you mean, we? Don't think for a second that I'm anything like you loser. I was born to be a winner, to be a Pokémon master. Just because you can't catch a Rattata doesn't mean that I can't either. Almost there. You mean you know how to catch the Rattata? Just a little more. It's called a Rattata, you fool, he was livid. And of course I know how to catch a stupid little Rattata, you just goad it a bit and throw a Pokeball, it's easy. Time to bring it home. This time, I slightly dropped the shy tone and enunciated each word with emphasis. I bet. You. Can't. Catch. The. Rattata. This threw him over his arrogant edge. Not knowing what I had planned to do once he left, he gave me an angry shove and stormed out of the lab. All the while muttering angry claims of superiority at me. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is how you manipulate a 10-year-old. Wow, that sounds wrong, but you know what I mean. There was no time to waste. I glanced into the front part of the lab, and after confirming no one was watching, I grabbed the Pokeballs off the lab table. Their metal surface was cool and smooth to the touch. No alarm went off, and though tempted, I didn't take the risk of inspecting them in awe. I shoved them deep inside my backpack and as casually as I could, walked out of the lab. It was time to begin my Pokémon journey. For Bulbasaur, Squirtle, Charmander. There was only one thing that concerned me about taking all 3 starters: would they obey me? I knew that they belonged to Professor Oak from his Pokémon trainer days, but the starter Pokémon were all supposed to be level 5, which I expected to also represent their youth. That means they haven't spent a lot of time with the prof to grow an unyielding sense of loyalty, right? Would they all accept me for their Pokémon trainer? I wanted and needed to find out, but I also wasn't about to run into a wild Pokémon encounter before I found out. It was therefore not straight towards Route 1 I headed, but to a secluded open area with a few trees, just east of the Route 1 entrance, on the north edge of Pallet Town. Here, I could assess the situation without fearing being seen from the main road. With great anxiety but also excitement, I took out the 3 Pokeballs and held them in my open palms. They had shrunk down to the small size, just like in the animated series. This detail of Pokeball technology was never discussed in any depth in the original game, but it appears that whatever Pokegod that created this world allowed some things to slip over. Just like this wider expanse of Pallet Town, compared to the games. I grabbed one of the small Pokeballs between my thumb and index finger. It was about the size of the average chicken egg, but spherical. I held it up in one open palm and the weight felt nice. I knew what to do. I pressed the button in the middle, where the red and white metal met. The ball expanded into the size of a baseball. Here goes, I said, and threw the ball in the ground about 4 feet from me. With that signature pop sound, a bright light came zapping out of the Pokeball and began phasing into shape in front of me. And as this was being done, not unlike how Captain America's shield comes returning to his hand after he throws it fighting the baddies in the MCU movies. The Pokeball returned to the hand with which I threw it. When I looked back to where I had thrown the Pokeball, the now fully phased-in Bulbasaur looked up at me with gentle curiosity. I stared at it, frozen in place with awe. It wasn't cute like you would think the cartoony Bulbasaur to be. It had reptilian skin and bulgy eyes with a red tint, and the bulb, my goodness. It was really a bulb, like that of a giant plant, somehow biologically attached to the back of this little beast. And yet, it was cute. It looked into my eyes, parting caution, parting curiosity, waiting to see what I would do. I slowly took a knee to come closer to eye level with the little beast. It followed my eyes down, but didn't flinch or grow nervous. That was a good sign. "Hi, Bulbasaur," I said with the softest, non-threatening voice. It wasn't hard to do in a 10-year-old's body. "I'm Ash," I said. "Is it okay if we become friends?" I held out my hand. "How to Train Your Dragon style." I'll be honest. I half expected him to say Bulbasaur, but he just let out a small purring sound, like a cat. He took a shy first step, then after smelling my hand, came even closer. I gently pet him on the head, and he closed his eyes in pleasure. And let me tell you, it was the coolest thing I've experienced, previous life included. Then I became curious. "Hey Bulbasaur, do you understand what I'm saying?" I asked, standing up. He looked up at me and rubbed his face against my leg. "I guess that's a maybe. Can you go over there?" I pointed at a spot about 10 yards away. He looked up at me and tilted his head, and I was about to repeat myself when he ran towards where I pointed, stopped, then turned around to face me. He waited for more instructions. I was awestruck. "That's so awesome," I muttered under my breath. But I didn't let myself pause for too long. "Bulbasaur, come here, please," I waved him over and had him sit by my feet. I reached for the other 2 Pokeballs, turned them on, so to speak, then threw both out at the same time, some distance in front of me. As the 2 Pokeballs snapped back in my hands at a satisfying velocity, I saw Squirtle and Charmander phase into reality. They both looked around and saw each other, and then seemed to inspect their surroundings, but then quickly looked at me with the same curiosity and caution as Bulbasaur. "Hi Squirtle, hi Charmander," I said. "I'm Ash, and this is Bulbasaur. Is it okay if we all become friends?" Squirtle was the first to come. He took 2 steps forward and then jumped into my arms, giving me a hug like a toddler. He actually was like a big blue turtle, but his skin was not slimy or wet. Difficult to explain, and you'll have to forgive me for my shortcomings in the Pokémon physiology. I'm not a zoologist. Or Pokemonologist. Charmander, on the other hand, did take a few steps forward, but stopped right in front of me, looking up into my eyes. He opened and closed his mouth a few times, exposing his small but sharp teeth, and I guessed it was some sort of a communicative behavior, like telling me he didn't completely trust me. But then I saw him visibly relax his body and blink his eyes a few times, slowly. As if to tell me, "All right, I'll give you a chance." So, yeah. That's how I ended up with all 3 starter Pokémon. Yes, I can confirm that they do not say their names. I'm guessing that was something that the producers of the game and the anime put in to make Pokémon more likable to children. It would be creepy, if you think about it, if these creatures could utter clear syllables like people. They did, however, seem to understand me fine. I think they interpreted what I was saying more through my tone and body language, at least. I guess it was not much unlike learning how to hear a new language when a person moves to another country to live there. You usually learn how to understand what people are saying, even when you don't know exactly what is being said. Despite clear differences to what they were in the games or the anime, Pokémon turned out to be very intelligent animals. Then I remembered Meowth from Team Rocket and wondered if he was here. But that's for another time. I explained to the trio that we were going on a journey, and it would be fun. I also told them that there might be times when they'd have to fight and protect themselves. I'm hoping that they got the gist of what I was trying to say, 'cause they seemed to be listening. I also practiced some movements together, but more on that later. After a while, I put them back into their Pokeballs. I shrunk the Pokeballs and put them in my jacket pocket, zipping it shut. They were my most precious balls. Wait. That came out wrong. You know what I mean. Having made friends with all 3 starter Pokémon the best I could, I now felt confident enough to really begin my journey. It was time for Route 1 to Viridian City. The coast was clear when I got to the entrance of Route 1, leading out of Pallet Town. There was a signpost that stated, Route 1, to Viridian City. I briefly reflected on the bias of naming the path as Route 1. And it wasn't even fully paved. Wasn't even all dirt roads, even. It looked like a dirt road that's been long neglected and had allowed the forest to slowly creep in. Some parts of it were thick with trees and tall shrubbery I couldn't pass through, and some parts were tall grass. Did people even pass by here? Geez. There was no one in sight, and so I started heading into Route 1. It wasn't long before I heard someone calling after me. Wait! It was Professor Oak. It's too dangerous to go. Where the heck did he come from? I swear he wasn't behind me a second ago. I was thinking about letting him know I had Pokémon protection with me when I noticed Gary running up behind him. This didn't happen in the game. It was then I heard a loud, aggressive squeaking noise behind me, and I turned around to see the biggest rat I'd ever seen in my entire life. And it was running straight at me. Episode 5, Route 1. I would be lying if I said I didn't want to unleash hell upon the rabid-looking rattata that was charging me. My hands reached for all 3 of my Pokeballs. Then I remembered that Professor Oak and Gary were right behind me, so a wiser idea prevailed. In a feigned and exaggerated panic, I ran towards Professor Oak and Gary. Help me! I saw Professor Oak with a Pokeball in hand, about to throw it at the rattata, but Gary stepped in front of him first. I got this, Gramps, he said, throwing the Pokeball at the rattata. The Pokeball made contact, and then opened up with a familiar pop sound. Rays of bright white light came out of the Pokeball and appeared to engulf the rattata. It swallowed the creature whole, so to speak, and then closed up and fell to the ground. It did the whole bleeping and twitching thing on the ground, then settled with a satisfying bleep. Ha! I caught it! Gary declared triumphantly, running to claim his Pokémon. My first Pokémon! Did you see that, Ash? I put on my best, very impressive, Gary face. I had to try very, very hard not to laugh. It seems Gary can take care of himself. Professor Oak reached me. He looked at me with kind concern. But are you all right, Ash? Yes, I'm okay, Professor, thanks for asking. That's a relief. But what were you thinking, going into the wild on your own like that? Oak asked. Well, I came looking for you at the lab earlier, but didn't see you there. Yeah, we were waiting for you, Gramps, but then Ash told me about this rattata, so I went home to grab my bags and my Pokeballs and had to save him. In your face, Ash. I caught it. Yeah, you sure did, Gary, I said. I guess I have to be glad that a wild rattata was actually here. This lucky coincidence added validity to my story. Gary smirked condescendingly at me. Then turned to his grandpa for a second and asked, why'd you call me over anyways? Well, I had a few Pokémon in my lab and wanted to give one to each departing trainer. Oh shoot. He mentioned the starters. He would eventually figure out that I took them, and then maybe he would ask for them back. What about Gary? If he found out that he was actually supposed to take one of them too, he might take one off of me. I had to think quickly. Professor, you mean you were going to give me my very first Pokémon? I asked. Yes, Oak replied. It would be dangerous to go into the wild without a Pokémon to defend yourself with. Gary looked at Oak. Is that why you called me over, Gramps? Go give me a Pokémon? Yes, Gary, and now that we're all here, we can walk back to the lab together. Oh. We couldn't walk back together. I had to think quick. Wait, I said. Then an idea. I mean, yes, of course, Professor Oak. It would definitely be unreasonable for a 10-year-old kid like me and Gary to not receive any help from you. Let's go, Gary, let's get a Pokémon from Professor Oak because we'd be helpless without his Pokémon. I turned to walk towards the lab, and Oak started after me. For a second Gary said nothing, and I was afraid my bluff was called. Then he shouted, "No way, I'm not going." "Yeses, go away." Professor Oak, and I turned towards him. "What do you mean, Gary?" Oak asked. "I don't need to come with you to the lab, Gramps, because I already caught my first Pokémon. I don't need you to help me, like I'm some sort of a loser." Gary went off on a short rant about how he was the best and was going to be the Pokémon master, and he didn't need a Pokémon from his grandpa. Blah blah blah. "But Gary, I think you'd really like one of the Pokémon I was going to give you," Professor Oak said. OMG STFU Oak. I needed Oak to let Gary go. "Oh, on second thought, Professor," I said. Gary did catch that scary Rattata all by himself, showing that he can take care of himself. I had no idea what to do, but Gary even knew how to catch it. "That's right, Gramps." Oak seemed to consider this, and then relented. "Well, I guess you're right, boys," he said. "All right, Gary, why don't you go on your journey now, seeing as how you have all your stuff on you? Don't forget to check in with me, okay?" "Fine, Gramps, fine," Gary said. He then turned to me, triumphantly. "Ha! It's the first day, and I'm already ahead of you, Ash. Smell ya later." He practically sprinted away from us, towards Viridian City. What a relief. "Come on, Ash, come to the lab with me." We walked back into the Pallet Town threshold, and I walked with him a few dozen yards, then, confident that no one was within earshot, I stopped walking. "Professor Oak," I called. "What's the matter, Ash?" "I have something to confess," I said. He waited for me to continue. I had to play this differently than I did with Gary. Let's think. Professor Oak. How can I get away with this? What pushed his buttons? What's his nature? A Pokémon expert whose Pokédex data is blank. But nevertheless a paternal figure. I gotta continue playing the helpless card. Earlier when I went to the lab looking for you, I didn't find you there, and when Gary rushed out to deal with the Rattata, I thought it would help, so I actually took the Pokémon from the lab. Oh. He didn't seem too upset, but the jury was still out. You see, I was afraid, and so I thought having a Pokémon would be helpful. Then I saw the Pokeballs just sitting there, and I knew that they were meant for us. But you said you took all three? I saw this question coming. I took the 3 Pokeballs out, and held it out for him. I tried to make my voice like I was on the verge of tears. "I'm so sorry, Professor," I said. At first, I took just one, but then I realized that if I didn't take the others, they would just sit there, on your lab table, for a very long time. "That's not true," he replied. He didn't sound sure. "Really? You're telling me that if I took one, and Gary took another, the third one wouldn't just sit there? Like forever?" The professor was surprised by my remark. The notion probably never occurred to him before. He thought about it, opened his mouth, as if to say something, then closed it again. "I'm sorry I took them," I lied. But I knew that Gary was good enough to catch a Pokémon all on his own, and I didn't want to take one Pokémon and leave others behind, neglected. I don't even have a dad. I just added that last part for fun. He seemed to consider this a bit. "I promise I'll take really good care of them," I said, using my 10-year-old innocence to my advantage. I will travel across the land, Professor," I started, trying my best to speak, not sing. "Searching far and wide. each Pokémon, to understand the power that's inside. He thought about it for another few seconds, then relented. Okay, Ash. I guess that's fine. Just take good care of them like you promised, and check in with me from time to time, okay? Of course, Professor. Thank you. He wished me well on my journey and walked back to the lab alone. In the end, what could he do? Gary and I were the only two trainers leaving Pallet Town, and no one else needed the starter Pokémons. And I must have appealed to the Professor Oak NPC's underlining programming in a way that allowed me to get away with it. I walked back into Route 1 and started walking north. I was thrilled I got away with taking all 3 starters. Now nothing was stopping me from getting to Viridian City. Well, except that group of half-dozen angry-looking Rattata there. They were running right at me. Damn it. Episode 6, Route 1. You know how in the Pokémon games, when you walk in the tall grass areas, one wild Pokémon would attack you? And you take turns making moves until you capture it or defeat it or run away or whatever. That's all BS. They attack you however they want to, in whatever number they can muster. Also, they don't wait for you to make moves in turns. This is not one of those Russian competitions where contestants take turns slapping each other until one of them faints or gives up. It's more like the UFC, man. And these Rattatas were fierce. They might have been related to the one Gary caught, or maybe witnessed that encounter and decided to attack any humans they came across. But these guys were out for blood. I'm not sure if they could have actually done any fatal damage to me, being really small, but I wasn't going to find out. And if they were going to attack in a group like this, I wasn't going to play by the rules either. I ran to create a bit of distance between me and the pack, turned around abruptly to stand my ground. I still saw them running at me, ready to do some damage. I grabbed all 3 Pokeballs and threw them out in front of me. Tackle! I shouted, as the blinding lights appeared from the Pokeball. Bulbasaur, Squirtle, and Charmander popped out of their digital resting places just in time to intercept 3 of the Rattatas running ahead of the group. I'm glad my Pokémon were just as quick as the little rats. Bulbasaur didn't have to tackle so much as to stand his ground, and use his butt to smash one of the Rattatas in the teeth. It bounced back a few yards back, visibly hurt. Squirtle turned around and launched himself towards the second Rattata, shell side first. The shell made contact with this Rattata harder than Bulbasaur's butt. And lastly, Charmander used his left shoulder to tackle the third Rattata. It didn't connect as hard as the other 2 attacks, but Charmander was already making threatening moves with his flaming tail, driving back the third Rattata that had already gotten back up. Remember when I said I had a bit of time with my starter Pokémon back in Pallet Town? I had already figured out what kind of moves my Pokémon knew, and what their strengths and weaknesses were. Bulbasaur had really strong muscles in all 4 legs, and could tackle the hardest, even though his speed wasn't anything to write home about. He could take physical hits like a beast, though. Tackling and taking tackles from Rattata was not a problem for him. Squirtle's shell is super tough. I taught him how to tackle shell first, and it obviously worked out. He was a natural. I even asked Charmander to try scratching the shell, and it didn't even leave a mark. I have to teach Squirtle some water moves, though, because he couldn't show me anything in that regard. Charmander was definitely the quickest of the 3, and had the sharpest claws. I tried to teach him to control the flame on his tail, to make it bigger to attack or smaller to dodge water attacks, and saw a little bit of success. In any case, that half an hour or so I spent before heading to Route 1 was enough to make my Pokémon understand how to fight. The Rattatas didn't stand a chance. The bravest of the group tried attacking again, but they were already scared. Charmander swiped his tail left and right while advancing, walking backwards. Bulbasaur and Squirtle stood close to him, left and right respectively, effectively forming a walking phalanx formation. If any of the Rattatas got close enough to try and flank Charmander, they'd bounce them back with a mean tackle. The Rattatas all ran away, disappearing into the tall grass. "Good fight, guys, good fight," I said. "Come over here." "Anyone hurt?" "No, good. Let's debrief. Bulbasaur, do you feel your vines?" "Oh, they're there, good, you just need some practice controlling them like a whip. Right now, it's too short. Squirtle, you can practice punching and headbutting. We'll find a stream or something later and see if that'll help you learn the water moves. Charmander, go sharpen your claws a little on that big rock over there and practice swiping and dodging. Here, I'll show you how to shadowbox." So and so forth. There was no way to accurately check the levels on my Pokémon or those in the wild. Even later I learned that this isn't actually a thing. Imagine in real life, putting levels on boxers or MMA fighters. It really doesn't work that way, does it? But more on this later. The rest of Route 1 was uneventful, and I thought perhaps the noise from the battle with the Rattatas spooked other wild Pokémon into hiding. I walked about 30 minutes along the path, until I came out of a clearing and onto a dirt road. A signpost stated, Viridian City. Episode 7, Viridian City Pokémon Center. Allow me to dedicate this entire chapter of my narrative in describing the first Pokémon Center I've ever been in my life. Both in-game and in real life. Let's get this straight. Pokémon Centers are not like they are in the games. It's not a small building where you're the only one looking to get his Pokémon healed up. They're usually the biggest building in each city because they provide services to not only Pokémon trainers, but also treats rescued wild Pokémon that were injured, has inpatient Pokémon rooms. Basic triage areas for people with Pokémon-inflicted wounds, injuries, etc. This one in Viridian City is actually 4 stories tall. It has a cafeteria in the basement, and the treatment center is actually on the 2nd floor, not the 1st. Have you been to a Pokémon Center store in Japan or somewhere else? They usually have Pokémon dolls, toys, etc. Well, imagine an entire floor of that on the 1st floor here. They also do have shops that sell Pokeballs and potions, etc., but just the standard merchandise. When I walked in the 1st floor, I was immediately welcomed by receptionists by the entrance. They asked how they could help me, and I said I needed my Pokémon to be looked at by a doctor. They sent me to the 2nd floor. Sorry guys. No Nurse Joy. Let's be serious. The notion that all the nurses Joy were physically identical to each other is just comically ridiculous. It was just a way for the animated series to save time and money on the show. I'm glad it didn't translate to this world. I took a number and waited for my turn, and a regular Pokémon nurse took my Pokeballs on a tray and processed the treatment. They were released to me within a matter of minutes on account that they weren't injured at all. Treatment was free. Afterwards, I decided to explore the other services offered at the Pokémon Center. Item storage and Pokémon storage are totally interesting. I didn't have anything to deposit myself, but I looked over the shoulders of some people using this machine to do so. There's a giant metal box that opens and closes, and I think it somehow digitizes physical objects to store and withdraw them. It kinda looks like a bigger version of those personnel screening machines at the airport. It was a long day, but it was still only my first day in this world. It was going to take some time for me to get used to how things worked here. There were fascinating technology and socio-cultural norms that I needed to become accustomed to. And suddenly I was tired. And hungry. Even though mentally I was still me from the previous life, I realized that I was in the body of this 10-year-old boy. The physical exertion of the day had taken a toll. The receptionist told me that in a separate wing of the Pokémon Center, there was a place where Pokémon trainers could rent a small room for a fee. I grabbed some takeout food from the cafeteria downstairs and headed over to the check-in counter. Poke rooms, they were called. A staff member asked me how many days I was staying, and I said just one. He also asked me what kind of Pokémon I had with me, and when I asked him why he asked, he said it was because if I had bigger Pokémon, I would have to rent a bigger room if I wanted to rest with him. When I asked him why I would take my Pokémon out of the Pokeballs, he looked at me like a monster. Turns out that hunger and fatigue levels of the Pokémon aren't frozen when they go in the Pokeball. Pokeballs are just a convenient way to carry the Pokémon, but you still need to take them out of the Pokeballs and feed them, etc. Have you ever smelled Pokémon poo? Be glad you never had to. I got the standard size room for one night, and was panicking when the guy asked me for 2,000 Poke dollars. That was a sizable chunk from what my funds. But then I realized water from the vending machine costed like 200 Poke dollars, and decided, not bad. I was just gonna have to figure out how to make money. I'm a 10-year-old. On a road. Alone. With limited funds. And that was normal. This was a weird world. I just wanted to paint a picture of the everyday life of people in this world, since none of this is an element featured in the original games. In future parts of my narrative, I will not dwell on these things, unless I am introducing something new or particularly interesting. I spent the rest of the evening with all three of my Pokémon, feeding them Pokémon feed that all of them seemed to enjoy. Later I would find that Bulbasaur also enjoys eating plants and flowers, Squirtlefish and plankton, and Charmander small insects and such. Yes, there are regular animals in this world too. The next morning, I was going to ask for directions to the local Pokémon goods store when something interesting happened. The staff at the front desk said I had a delivery from someone named Professor Oak from Pallet Town. I opened a small box and found a small red electronic device about the size of a smartphone. My very own Pokédex. Episode 8, Viridian Forest. Two things already happened as a butterfly effect of my actions. First, Gary joined Professor Oak on his way to Route 1 to meet me, and now, he sent the Pokédex by post rather than having to have me visit him in his lab again. This was perfect, because it saved me a trip to the Pokémon Mart and back to Pallet Town. After purchasing a dozen Pokeball from the store in the Pokémon Center, I headed north to Viridian Forest. I tried my best to look for the alternative route. You know, the one that you can use cut to gain access to and from? Route 2? Through the tunnel from Vermilion City? Yeah, I couldn't find it. I did later though, that's for another time. Instead, the road to Viridian Forest was obvious, as it was the biggest attraction of Viridian City and the main way to get to Pewter City. There was a gated area with a uniformed staff handing out a pamphlet of the Viridian Forest. It had a general guide of how to get to Pewter City. Think of Viridian Forest as a national park, thick with deciduous trees. The thick leaves of the trees and tall grass areas really blot out the sky when you're in the thick of the forest, and color the area in a Viridian color, dark teal. Like I said, there is a common path to Pewter City that is not too hard to find, but the forest does have areas that are open for exploration, and can wind around to join the common path. Most of the vast forest is not mapped, and very few trainers travel deep into uncharted territories here. I walked along the main path for a while, and ran into... Hey, we have a Patreon chock full of NSFW content. Audios, GIFs, sauces, captions and more in our Patreon. Most of the audios are free, however, everything else will cost you. I want to grow story into an actual brand business. An actual animation, publishing, movie studio. So if even you follow our Patreon for free, it'll really help out. Episode 8, Viridian Forest, Part 1. Two things already happened as a butterfly effect of my actions. First, Gary joined Professor Oak on his way to Route 1 to meet me, and now, he sent the Pokédex by post rather than having to have me visit him in his lab again. This was perfect, because it saved me a trip to the Pokémon Mart and back to Pallet Town, hours off my schedule. After purchasing a dozen Pokeball from the store in the Pokémon Center, I headed north to Viridian Forest. I tried my best to look for the alternative route. You know, the one that you can use cut to gain access to and from? Route 2? Through the tunnel from Vermilion City? Yeah, I couldn't find it. I did later though, that's for another time. Instead, the road to Viridian Forest was obvious, as it was the biggest attraction of Viridian City and the main way to get to Pewter City. There was a gated area with a uniformed staff handing out a pamphlet of the Viridian Forest. It had a general guide of how to get to Pewter City. Think of Viridian Forest as a national park, thick with deciduous trees. The thick leaves of the trees and tall grass areas really blot out the sky when you're in the thick of the forest and color the area in a viridian color, dark teal. Like I said, there is a common path to Pewter City that is not too hard to find, but the forest does have areas that are open for exploration and can wind around to join the common path. Most of the vast forest is not mapped, and very few trainers travel deep into uncharted territories here. I walked along the main path for a while and ran into nothing. No other people, and no wild Pokémon. Quite eerie, actually. My best guess is that all the wild Pokémon near the main path have been all caught, so trainers wanting to catch some bug Pokémon had ventured a bit deeper into the forest. After a while, I decided that it would be boring to get to Pewter City without encountering anything. I needed, after all, to make sure that my Pokémon were battle-hardened and ready for the first gym. So when I saw an opening to the left of the main path, I decided to head that way. Before long, I started to hear a few human voices coming from behind some trees. I decided to sneak up and see what was going on. In a small clearing, I saw two boys, teenagers, just a few years older than me, standing over a smaller boy, more near my age. At first, I thought the smaller boy had gotten hurt and the other boys were helping him, but it soon became clear that it was a bullying situation. "Cough it up, loser," one of the bigger boys said, kicking the victim in the leg. "Wow, WTF. Please, that's all I have, I swear," the smaller boy said. His face was already covered with dirt, tears running down on his cheeks. It was then I noticed that the smaller boy was clutching an unconscious Pidgey in his arms. "I get to punch you in the face 10 times for every 100 Pokebucks I find in your bag, loser," the bigger boy on the left said. "Let's call him Dick 1. There was a Rattata standing next to him. Dick 2 was already going through the smaller boy's bag. A Weedle was standing next to this guy. This was obviously so effing messed up. Two teenagers beating the shiz out of a smaller boy, stealing his money and beating not only his Pokémon, but the boy himself. Then I realized. Holy SHI, that's actually what happens in the Pokémon game. Random trainers force you to engage in Pokémon battles you can't run away from, and then if you run out of Pokémon to battle with, you faint and lose money. What? Why did this never occur to me? Because it was just a game. Why else did you faint and end up in the nearest Pokémon Center when you lost a battle? That's because they beat you up silly and somehow you made it back into the Pokémon Center where the police can keep the law. The police didn't give a damn what happened in between cities. I assessed the situation. What would I do if I was Dick 1 or Dick 2, trying to beat up a kid to steal his money? I'd use my best Pokémon. A Rattata? A Weedle? How hilarious. Time for some justice. Was there a formal or polite way to challenge trainers to a battle? Probably, but I wasn't sure. What I was sure about is that these losers didn't deserve anything of the sort. I was going to give them nothing, but take from them everything. I circled around so that I could come up from behind them. I then summoned all 3 of my starters from behind the trees. The dicks didn't notice. The best idea was to leave Bulbasaur to deal with Weedle, because he could handle the poisonous stinger if it came to that. Charmander would go and scratch the Rattata to bits. Squirtle. Well, keep reading. Bulbasaur, tackle Weedle from the side. Charmander, scratch Rattata, watch out for his bites. I shouted, while holding the bushes aside so the ambush could happen. Ha! Dick too cried out. Without any commands, and caught completely off guard, the tiny Weedle took a full Bulbasaur to its side and went tumbling yards away. As previously instructed, my Bulbasaur didn't wait for further instructions, but kept on charging the insect, tackling him again and again. No need to wait for the Weedle to get up. Taking turns is a stupid thing. Rattata, tackle! Dick 1 managed to issue this command, but the Rattata was momentarily distracted by the charging Bulbasaur, so it didn't see the Charmander coming. It stood no chance. The scratches went deep, and despite its thick skin, compared to a regular rat, at least, the Rattata started bleeding in some places. I had told Charmander to hold back his attacks against smaller guys, so if he hadn't, I know the cuts would have opened up deeply. Are you okay? I approached the smaller boy, but from a few feet away. I still had to keep my eyes on the dicks. Wait, that came out wrong. What, that sounded wrong too. Damn it. It seemed like he wanted to say something to me, but he was in pain. Hey, what's your problem, man? Dick 1 had the audacity to ask. My Weedle. No fair. Dick 2 matched his buddy. All right, I said. This is what's going to happen. You're going to take out everything you took from this guy and put them down on the ground here. Then you're going to take out everything you have and leave it here too. Then scram. Ha, no way. Cater pie, string shot on the Bulbasaur. Dick 1 shouted, as he threw a Pokeball behind me. Nidoran, tackle the guy. Dick 2 shouted, also throwing a Pokeball towards me. I expected that the Dicks would be carrying more than just one Pokemon. I'm also glad that I expected that the Dicks might order their Pokemon to attack me, and not just my Pokemon. I wasn't sure if that was an element in this world, but what can I say? I wasn't taking any chances. Bulbasaur stood still, letting himself get covered with some sticky string. Big deal. Charmander went up to the distracted Caterpie and connected with a scratch tackle combo. The little big went sprawling on the ground a few feet away, unconscious. Charmander used his flames carefully to free Bulbasaur from the webs. At the same instant, Nidoran came to tackle me, aiming for my hips, the center of gravity. I'll give it points for that. But I turned my back to face the Nidoran, and guess who was clutching onto my backpack? That's right, Squirtle. He was on my back this entire ambush, waiting as backup. Squirtle's hard shell connected hard with the Nidoran, and at its high speed, it basically knocked itself out. With even their second Pokemon knocked out, the two teenagers looked flustered and defeated. Even more so when my Pokemon surrounded them from behind. Let's try that again, I said. Leave all your stuff. Now. They dropped the loot, let's say, on the ground, and after collecting their Pokemon, ran off into the direction of Viridian City. Hey, thanks, the smaller boy, still older than me, said. He explained that he was looking for some insect Pokemon deep in the woods, and while he had confidence in his Pidgey to fend Pokemon off, he couldn't handle being teamed up on by those bullies. After the Pokemon battle was over, the bullies had beat him up themselves. Is this usual? I asked. What do you mean? Is it normal for Pokemon trainers to force others to battle, then beat up the loser and take all his money? Ah. Which planet did you come from, man? He asked. I'm new to this? I tried. He explained that usually trainers agreed on the conditions of the battle, i.e. number of Pokemon to use, time, etc., and wagered an agreed amount of money. Usually these friendly battles ended when a trainer submitted, rather than when all the Pokemon fainted, because it's more for practice. However, deep in the wild where the city police do not patrol, bullies were out to make more money by just simply, well, robbing you. It never got too serious, the boy explained. They just roughed you up a bit and took money. No one ever leaves another person for dead. That's still so wrong. He absolutely refused to take all the money. He took a bit of money that he claimed was originally his, and left the rest to me. The bullies had left, however, some potion sprays, and he asked me if he could use one for his Pidgey. I said of course. Release the safety pin, which opens the spray, then use the button to release a misty dose of nanobots that. Just kidding. I don't actually know how it works, but the Pidgey started to come around and regained some energy. There was a small cut on his left wing that, after the potion mist had been sprayed on it, seemed to speed up in the healing process. It was like watching Wolverine healing in slow-mo. Pretty cool. Maybe there were nanobots. Say, are you headed to Pewter City? He asked. Yes, but I wanted to catch some bug Pokémon first. And maybe a Pidgey for myself as well. I looked at his Pidgey. It looked up at me with googly eyes. Cute. I can't thank you enough for helping me out, he said. I can at least show you where to find some of the wild Pokémon in the forest. Thanks to the potions, I don't have to go to a Pokémon Center right away. I agreed right away. I wanted to catch some Pokémon, because I suspected that filling up the Pokédex somewhat would help me in my journey. After all, even though I had a strong theoretical knowledge of Pokémon, the living creatures were entirely new to me in this physical world. Having a friend would help me. Say, there wouldn't happen to be Bulbasaurs in the Viridian Forest, would there? I asked. Not on the route between Viridian and Pewter cities, no. There's supposed to be a family of Bulbasaurs and Ivysaurs led by a really old Venusaur, but their home is deep in the woods, and no one knows where it is. Lucky you have one already, because it'll be rare to even see one here. I see. Then let's start with the bugs, I said. My name is Alan, by the way. Alan held out a hand. I shook it. Nice to meet you. It was good to make a friend in this new world. Episode 9, Viridian Forest, Part 2. While walking together in search of wild Pokémon, Alan and I had an opportunity to chat, and I naturally learned a bit more about how things worked in this world. For example, I asked about the Pewter City Gym and learned that you have to defeat gym trainers before you can challenge the leaders for their badges. Even when you become eligible, you have to sign up for a time and date. You can't just walk in and demand a fight. And these gym leader battles only happen once every few days, so it might be a long time before getting a badge. So I might not even be able to get a badge for a while even if I'm skilled enough to beat the gym leader? That's kinda lame, I said. Well, yes, but that's how the Pokémon League tries to maintain its prestige. But there are ways to speed this process, if you're good enough. What? I need this info. Now. Alan went on to explain that many Pokémon trainers that are eligible for battling the gym leaders loiter around the gym. When they find someone with an earlier battle date, they fight for their ticker, essentially. Wait, I interrupted. Why would anyone with an earlier time battle someone with a later time? They have nothing to gain? True, Alan admitted. That's why those with later times often wager larger sums of money for the tickets. I see. Besides, Alan said, Pokémon trainers are competitive by nature. Many don't back down from a challenge. Makes sense. Oh, here we are. We have to keep our voice down here. Alan motioned for me to follow him quietly through some bushes. After a little bit, we came into a thick grove of trees and a small clearing. There were many caterpies roaming about, eating leaves, and a whole lot of metapods on the trees, sleeping and growing. Whoa. It was one thing to be given 3 Pokémon to you, already captured, and also to have a bunch attack you. But it was quite another to witness a group of a species of Pokémon living peacefully in its natural habitat. I took Bulbasaur out and walked into the clearing. The Caterpies noticed me and back away with suspicion. Alan followed behind me. "Hey you guys," I said, keeping my voice low. "I don't want to hurt any of you, so please don't attack me. Just hear me out." The Caterpies looked a bit alarmed, but stood still. "I just want one of you, and I promise I'll leave the rest of you guys alone." The Caterpies made a bunch of bug noises. They seemed to consider what I said. After a few seconds, the Caterpies made way for a particular Caterpie that was huge. It was almost a full foot taller than any of the others, and had a mean expression on his face. It slowly crawled in front of me, and I was afraid it would attack me, but it stood still. "He's so big," Alan said. I took an empty Pokeball out and threw it at the giant Caterpie. Instead of letting it hit itself, Caterpie turned swiftly and batted the Pokeball back at me with its tail. It then puffed its body to make it look bigger. I suddenly realized what it wanted. "You don't want to go without a fight, do you?" The Caterpie stood its ground. "Fine," I said, with a smile on my face. "I respect that." It wasn't as easy a battle as I thought. The overgrown Caterpie had really hard lips that made my Bulbasaur feel pain. It also could take some tackles like a beast. In the end, though, Bulbasaur was clearly the stronger fighter. Lying on its side, and panting in exhaustion, the Caterpie finally relented and was captured by a Pokeball. I took him back out and treated it with a potion that I got off the Dicks earlier, and gave her, turns out, time to say farewell to her friends. One of them really wanted to come with us, so Alan gladly captured that one, too. "That was something," Alan said while we were walking to a different part of the forest. "I'm glad it wasn't such an easy fight," I said. "I think Bulbasaur learned something from it." Again, turns out levels and experience and stats are all in-game stuff that didn't translate over in this world. Nothing appeared quantitatively anywhere, except physical attributes like weight and height that are measured at Pokémon centers for medical purposes. It would take my own personal skills to be the judge of a Pokémon's fighting fitness and skill. At a different part of the forest, we had to sneak by a hive of Beedrills. We weren't going to mess with that. There were dozens and dozens of fully grown Beedrills. We snuck past by their main territory until we ran into some harmless Weedles and got one each without much resistance. We ran into a few nice Pokémon trainers and I agreed on a few battles. I used all three of my starters evenly, working on them evading attacks, mostly. All of them were getting better working with my commands, but Bulbasaur especially showed great improvement in speed and using his vines. Oh, just a note on moves, also a game gimmick. In reality, Pokémon obviously know more than just 4 moves, and can learn more without forgetting. It's just that some moves become obsolete as they grow and have to fight stronger opponents. Also, they have no limitations on basic moves like tackling and scratching, it's just a matter of stamina. Special attacks, however. We'll talk about it soon. Another thing that is not part of the game, but is actually common practice in this world, training with just your own Pokémon. You can have them spar each other, and you can even practice fighting with them. Obviously during training, you don't aim to hurt each other for real. But imagine training a police dog in real life, and you get a good idea. Getting closer to the north end of the forest meant that the trees became smaller and sparse. I caught a Pidgey, a Rattata, and both genders of Nidoran here. Then we came to the main dirt road again where we could see other trainers walking towards some buildings ahead in the horizon. We were finally approaching Pewter City. Episode 10, Pewter City. Pewter City lies at the western base of Mt. Moon, which is visible from anywhere within the city. The mountain's massive body casts a massive shadow over the city in the morning, coming up to warm up the air in the early afternoon. Alan and I went to the Pewter City Pokémon Center together and checked in our Pokémons for healing services. What are you going to do now? Alan asked. Straight to the gym? I don't feel like I'm ready yet, I said honestly. I think I will spend some time training and exploring the city first. All right, Alan said. Here, I'll give you my number. I'll probably spend a few days here and then head back home to Cerulean City. My family owns a restaurant there. Look me up when you get there, yeah? I added Alan's number into the phone. It was one of those old-school 2G-type phones. Apparently this world had amazing Pokémon-related technology, but not so much in the way of human telecommunications. What a weird afterlife. After I got my Pokémon back, I went to the reception area in the Pokémon Center to gather a bunch of pamphlets with information about local attractions. A lot of it was related to Empty Moon, of course, guided tour of Empty Moon, moonstone mining, and so forth. There was a pamphlet with information of local bed and breakfast places, so I grabbed one of those. And oh, that's right. There was the Pewter City Museum of Natural History. I decided to check it out. On the way to the museum, I saw the Pewter City Gym, of course, on the left. Even from far away, I could see a small group of Pokémon trainers standing in a circle, watching two trainers battle it out. It was exciting. The museum was free to view, so I took my time looking at fossils of ancient Pokémon. There were also sections on natural herbs and minerals with different properties that affected Pokémon, so I took notes on those. For example, a certain species of red berries were too bitter to eat, although not poisonous, but could be crushed up and applied on burns and small cuts. Important things to note, I thought, if I ever find myself in the wild away from spray meds for Pokémon. Those spray things add weight to my backpack, after all, and there was a limit to what I can carry. Then I remembered. Wasn't there an old amber that I can find around here? I walked around the museum until I found the labs that researchers use to preserve and study fossils. I found some people in lab coats in there and asked about any interesting amber discoveries. Then these nerds got excited. They were so happy to see a young natural history enthusiast that they blabbed about a section of wooded area near Empty Moon Cave entrance where new ambers were being discovered in dig sites. This one here is especially exciting, one of them said, showing me an old amber in a plastic case. We're hoping that our colleagues in Cinnabar Island can finish their research soon so we can try to extract the DNA from things like this. Oh, cool. My Uncle Blaine lives on Cinnabar Island, I lied. The lab coats all stopped what they were doing, stunned. You know Blaine? The Cinnabar City gym leader? One of them asked. Aha, he used to come up to Pallet Town all the time and show me his fire Pokémon. They lost their minds. One of them asked me if I could get him a signature. Another asked if he had seen a Magmar in real life. I listened and responded to them for a while, then said, I think Uncle Blaine would be interested in that amber. And that's how I was given the old amber with the DNA of an Aerodactyl inside. Afterwards, I called ahead to a bed and breakfast place in the west part of the city. It was run by an old couple and had two other trainers staying there. One of them challenged me to a battle. His Rattata was easily defeated by my Charmander. He was becoming quite a boxer, but instead of blunt fists, it was sharp claws. It was hard to hit him in close-quarter battles. The trainer used his Pidgey next and told him to use Gust from the air. It was an attempt to stay away from my Charmander, and it was smart. However, the Pidgey had to get close to a certain degree in order for the Gust to do any damage, and in that distance, I told Charmander to make his tail flame as big as he can. And try to get directly below the Pidgey. I actually wanted him to jump to get the flame closer to Pidgey, but he needed to concentrate to make the flame big, and it was already costing him his focus and stamina. The Pidgey tried to get away, but Charmander kept on following him, standing directly under the bird Pokémon with his flame. The heat from the flame and the flying around eventually depleted Pidgey's stamina, bringing him down to the ground. Charmander finished him off with some scratches. I have one last Pokémon, the trainer shouted, bringing out a Geodude. I caught him from Empty Moon last week. This was great. I got some practice against rock types before going to the Pewter City gym. I recalled Charmander and brought out Bulbasaur. Geodude's two main attacks were throwing small rocks and punching with his big fists. Bulbasaur was able to take both types like a boss. For experimental purposes, I told Bulbasaur to buckle down and take the hits, rather than wasting energy to avoid them. One time Geodude came in for a punch and I told Bulbasaur to wrap his vines around him, rather than just whipping him with it. Geodude couldn't move. I told Bulbasaur to start whipping Geodude on the ground left and right, and it was quite funny. The battle was over. I made enough money to cover the BNB costs and then some. Tomorrow was going to be another day, and I already had plans. Where's the nearest body of water? I asked the old couple. It was time to up my water game. Episode 12, Pewter City Gym Part 1. The next morning, after breakfast, I found a stream in the outskirts of Pewter City. It flowed out from the crevices of Empty Moon, the old couple explained. The clean and plentiful water source from Empty Moon was the biggest reason why Viridian Forest grew to be the massive forest that it is today. This stream was about a yard in width, too small to be called a river, but had a nice steady flow of water. As soon as I brought all my Pokémon out, they started enjoying the natural area. Rattata and the Nidorans were roaming around, and Pidgey flew around the area looking for worms. Caterpie climbed a tree and started eating the leaves. Bulbasaur and Squirtle both went to soak their feet in water. Charmander, too, found a large nearby and started napping on it. He was a lizard, after all. Oh, did I mention you can carry more than 6 Pokémon? You just can't use more than 6 in official battles or tournaments. Did you think that the moment you caught a 7th Pokémon, that the Pokeball would magically teleport to a digital box? Get real. Squirtle was in his element, soaking his feet in the stream. Literally. The water seemed to physically energize and empower him. Squirtle, do you think you can squirt water on that really hard? I said, pointing to a tree nearby. Squirtle puffed up like he was inhaling water, then started releasing a thin stream of water at a very high speed. Basically, imagine a pressure washer. The water made contact with the tree at a speed so high that it started taking off sections of the outer bark of the tree. Whoa! Nice, Squirtle. He went like that for a few seconds, but then stopped and panted. It seemed like there was a limit to his endurance, or a limit to how much water he can spray, or both. He didn't need to drink water to spray it, either. He could soak up the water into his body by making contact with water, standing on the stream in this case, storing a set amount of it. We spent a good few hours practicing different moves and theories behind how that worked. I also set up a regimen for the other Pokémon. While I worked one-on-one with Squirtle, I paired up different Pokémon to spar and battle. One of the more special training exercises included trying to dodge and evade all of your sparring partner's attacks, and another was the opposite. Letting your sparring partner take free hits on you to increase your endurance and pain tolerance levels. Charmander was especially important because his flame was threatening to most of the other Pokémon. I taught them to get used to the heat, to be wary but not afraid of it, and how to deal with it if the flame caught fire on their furs, stop, drop, and roll. Thus, after a productive morning, I went to the Pokémon Center to heal all my Pokémon to tip-top condition, fed them, and headed to the Pewter City Gym. There were a few trainers loitering outside, but none of them bothered me as I walked in. The door opened to a small office space inside. It had some information about rock-type Pokémon and even a bit about Empty Moon. There was a wall with a big picture of Brock, OMG Brock in real life. Weird, and a list of those who earned the Boulder Badge. It wasn't a short list. Gary's name wasn't on it yet. Ha! There was a reception desk, so I lined up behind the queue. Most of the trainers were older than me. Older than this body. Well, I guess I have to accept the fact that I'm 10 years old now. So yeah, older than me. The trainers all received a number and went through the doors into the gym space. I was getting excited and nervous. May I help the next person in line? The lady at the reception was very nice, and when I told her I wanted to become eligible for the badge battle, as it was called, she explained the rules. I paraphrase below. To become eligible to schedule up for the badge battle, you need to defeat one of Brock's coaches. They will be using 2 rock-type Pokémon. You are allowed to use up to 3 Pokémon. Only 1 Pokémon from each trainer can be engaged in battle at a time. The battle ends when a trainer yields or all his or her Pokémon are incapacitated. 1 healing item is allowed throughout the entire match. If you break these rules, you're disqualified, obviously. Oh, and the sign-up fee is 10,000 Poke Dollars. If you get defeated by the gym coach today, you have to reapply. Would I like to sign up for a battle today? That's right. And it totally makes sense. How else will the gyms in the Poke League stop any noob to just come battle every day for free until they get lucky and defeat the gym coaches and leaders? Yes, I said. I'll sign up for a coach battle today. I handed over the cash to the lady and she gave me a number ticket. Lucky 13. Geez. Go on through those doors there, the lady said, pointing to where all the previous trainers went through. Good luck! Through the doors was a long and spacious hallway with a high ceiling. There was a staff member that checked my ticket and led me to the boys' locker room. Insert meme here. You can lock your stuff up here and bring the Pokémon you're going to use for the battle. Please remember, 3 Pokémon for this battle and 1 healing item only. There were 3 or 4 other trainers also getting ready. They were all older than me. I guess we were all nervous or maybe trying to look tough, because no one said any friendly hellos to one another. Then suddenly, another trainer came into the locker room from the other door, the door that led to the area where the battles took place. He was visibly upset, with tears of frustration coming down his face. He was also swearing under his breath. He sat down on one of the empty benches. No one had to ask what happened. He had lost. After grabbing my starter Pokémons, went out the same doors the guy had come through. It felt like a high school competition of some sort, the qualification stages. I guess technically this kinda was. Exactly that. The large gym was divided into 3 smaller battlefields, with referees placed beside each one. There was a gym coach at each of the battlefields, and when one battle finished, a new trainer would go to the vacant space. There were also gym coaches on the sidelines that would sub with one another. They were all wearing the brown-gray Pewter City gym jackets. Brock was nowhere to be seen, but there were spectator stands with a few local visitors observing the battles. It was an efficient system designed to maximize profit. Waiting in line, I could see the battles. Most of the challengers were using small Pokémon found in the local area. Rattatas, Pidgeys, Nidorans, etc. They didn't fare well against the toughened Geodudes that were experienced against these types. The Geodudes took the physical hits very well, their bodies are literally rock, guys. Advancing upon the smaller Pokémon until they were close enough to grab and pummel them with their literal rock fists. A simple and brutal tactic. The coaches sometimes switched to Sandshrews that used their sharp claws to attack and tough plating to defend against attacks. Everyone in front of me lost their battles. I was finally the first in line, waiting for the next vacancy. A staff member came up to me, checked my ticket, and restated the battle rules. 2 Pokémon by the gym coach. Up to 3 by me. Fight until all are knocked out, or player submission. Battle court is clearly outlined with straight lines, about the size of a tennis court but slightly bigger. If a Pokémon goes out of bounds, that particular Pokémon is given 1 warning, then disqualified the second time. No time limit, but if a player does not instruct his or Pokémon to fight, then it is seen as submission after a countdown. Pokémon substitutions must occur using Pokeballs. The Rattata is no longer able to battle, a referee shouted from one of the battle spaces. The player has no more Pokémon fit for battle. The gym coach wins this match. Next challenger, please. I saw the player withdraw his Pokémon and shake hands with the gym coach. A different gym coach came down to the area and stood ready, looking at me. It was time for my first gym battle. Episode 13, Pewter City Gym, Part 2. My palms were sweaty, knees were weak, arms were heavy. Yada yada yada. Of course I was nervous. I know it wasn't Brock, and this was only the first gym, but I've never had to do this for real, you know, in the flesh. In the games, it's so easy to just give your Pokémon commands, and yes, there are fight, move, animations, but at the end of the day, it's just pixels. Here, everything was real. I've battled before, but this was my first GYM. My heart was beating like crazy, and I wasn't sure if I could come out on top. Only one way to find out. The referee on the sideline counted down loudly. The battle will start in 3, 2, 1. Battle! We both threw our Pokeballs at the same time. It was Geodude versus Bulbasaur. The gym coach started to speak. A Bulbasaur, huh? I haven't seen one in a while. Most of the time it's Pidgeys or Raichu. You know how in movies or games, the villain or even sometimes the MC just goes on the talk and wastes time? Yeah, none of that for me. I had instructed all my Pokémon before the battles how to react, depending on the Pokémon that they could possibly face. The strategy one told Bulbasaur was the same as the last time he faced Geodude. He wrapped his vines around both of Geodude's arms and started to slam him on the ground. It damaged Geodude badly. Pattern B, Bulbasaur. I shouted. Bulbasaur stopped slamming Geodude left and right with his vines extended to the optimal length. Instead, he extended his vines a bit further and slammed him outside the arena boundary. Bulbasaur was careful not to touch the outer boundary with his vines. It was a test of the arena limit rules. I had wondered what would happen if one Pokémon physically forced another to go out of bounds. Geodude is out of bounds. He receives his first warning. The referee shouted. A red hologram counter of 10 seconds popped up in the middle of the battle arena. Geodude must return to the arena. 10. 9. Geodude, get a grip, the gym coach shouted. Get out of there. Press him down and remember the angle, Bulbasaur. I shouted. 6. 5. Ugh. The gym coach shouted with exasperation and took out his Pokeball. Return. The red laser from the Pokeball tried to extract Geodude from Bulbasaur's grip. Cheap move. Ha! The gym coach gasped in surprise as my Bulbasaur blocked the beam of light from the Pokeball with his body. Because Bulbasaur didn't belong to the gym coach, the beam did nothing to Bulbasaur. 2. 1. Geodude was unable to return within the boundary on his own. He is disqualified. The referee shouted. The gym coach was visibly livid. This obviously hasn't happened to him from a newbie, or so he thought. By now the crowd's attention was on this battle. The other battle courts haven't started new matches since ours began. Let him go, Bulby, I said, trying out a new nickname. Bulbasaur released his grasp of Geodude, who sullenly floated back towards his trainer. The gym coach is down to his last Pokémon, the referee shouted. All right, kid, I see you. The gym coach seemed to get in control of his emotions and smirked. Let's see how you deal with this. Go, Sandshrew. I expect him to use Sandshrew, but not one this big. It was a mother trucker of a Sandshrew, gigantically big. It probably came up to my chest, and for a sandshrew, that was huge. This time, the coach didn't waste time talking either and immediately commanded Sandshrew to curl up into a ball and attack with a tackle. The natural move would have been to tell Bulbasaur to use his vines to attack or tackle in return. That would have been an amateur move. Bulbasaur, pain train, I said. I know, kinda lame, perhaps. But it was 2 syllables, and it rhymed. Bulbasaur drove his 2 vines into the ground hard and deep, don't say anything, please, into the ground, parallel and close to one another. Because Sandshrew was coming directly towards him, it was easy to do what he wanted next. The ball that was Sandshrew contacted the vine rails and he launched off the makeshift ramp and out of the arena boundaries. Sandshrew is out of bounds, the referee shouted. He receives a warning. But this time, without any fetters on him, Sandshrew was able to return within bounds. The gym coach was mad, but kept a cool head. He realized that balling up wasn't the way to go with Sandshrew. Claw your way towards him, Sandy. Sandshrew used his sharp little claws, good thing he wasn't a Sandslash yet, and started advancing menacingly towards Bulbasaur. It was enough. I withdrew my Bulbasaur into his Pokeball and threw out the second. Pattern C, Squirtle, I instructed. Squirtle got down on his 4 legs and got down, lowering his center of gravity. He half extracted his head all the way into his shell. Just as a side note, all my Pokemon and I figured out a system, which got more elaborate and better as time went by, so that even if they lost sight of the opposing Pokemon, they can determine the relative position and distance, and later, angle of elevation and depressions, from their current location. For example, the first branch of protocol was audio cues. 620 flat or 620 meant that the opponent was at the relative 6 o'clock, directly behind, 20 feet away. Flat on the ground or 0 degree of elevation. That's just one example, but I'm not going to give this trade secret away. Long story short, with audio and sometimes visual cues, e.g. me giving hand and other body signals, I was able to communicate things clearly, quickly, and most importantly, secretly to my Pokemon. This is how Squirtle was able to keep his vital areas, head, in his hard shell while Sandshrew was advancing with his claw strikes. They were met with the hardened shell like a shield, and could not do any damage. Leg sweep, angle 20, left 2 delta 43. Now! I calmly communicated. Squirtle used his left hind leg and did a spinning low sweeping kick on the Sandshrew at my signal. I had timed it when the guard was down, and Squirtle's leg took out both of Sandshrew's legs and he went down on the ground on his back. But even before Sandshrew hit the ground, I was already giving the next command. Pattern 1, force 40%, then move to frame position, give 1 take. To everyone else, this was pure gibberish. But what I said to Squirtle was tackle strategy, using only 40% power, because I didn't want Squirtle to accidentally go out of bounds, then move secretly towards the outer edge of the battle area 1 yard away from the line. Squirtle's tackle did some damage, even at 40% power. I had practiced, with all my Pokemon, tackling and taking tackles. Did you know that professional boxers sometimes train just getting hit to build up their physical endurance? Without going into details, let's just say that all my Pokemon had made multiple visits to the Pokemon Center. The Sandshrew just barely managed to hold on. He looked hurt. I wish I could say that the rest of the battle was as exciting as the first few minutes, but it wasn't. The gym coach was overthinking about not having Sandshrew go out of bounds to use Sandshrew's ball attacks, which is actually quite strong, force equals mass times acceleration. And Sandshrew's acceleration is something to note. Without the Rammus-style attacking patterns, which I was prepared for anyways, Sandshrew's tiny claws were no match for Squirtle's first defend then counterattack strategy. Even with tiny legs, Squirtle was very flexible and quick. Very, very quick. Sandshrew is unable to battle. The challenger wins. I couldn't help but notice that the audience had grown. Most people were just happy about the exciting battle they had just seen. No doubt it was different from the other battles they'd seen today. Others seemed to be deciding whether the result was because the gym coach was bad, or if I was just good. The gym coach was mad as hell, but still showed good sportsmanship by coming over to shake my hand. A gym staff came and gave me a ticket with the gym leader battle date on it. 2 weeks later. 2 weeks? I groaned. I didn't want to be stuck here for 2 weeks. But then I remembered what Alan told me and smiled devilishly. Episode 14, Pewter City Gym, Part 3. Turns out worrying about being stuck in Pewter City for 2 weeks was me overthinking the situation. As soon as I left the gym, I was harassed by half a dozen trainers who wanted my ticket, my money, or the boasting rights of beating me. "He's just a kid," one of the older ones said, mockingly. "I can't believe he beat a coach. I'm sure I can take him on with one Pokémon." I had Charmander one-hit all of his, instead. "I'll teach this little brat a lesson," another cocky SOB stepped up. I had Bulbasaur tank all the hits on purpose, and then when the opposing Pokémon were too tired, just grab them and throw them into the trainer. Bulbasaur was too OP. I was obviously gentler with the humbler trainers that challenged me with sportsmanship. I just can't stand bullies and assholes. About an hour later. Anyone else? You? No? Let's just say that I was richer and my Pokémon were more experienced. I tripled the cash I had on me and even got a chance to use a rotation system to get Caterpie, the two Nidorans, and Pidgey some real battle experience. Each of them was turning into a beast. Caterpie evolved into Metapod after one of the battles, and everyone stood in awe. They'd never seen a Metapod that was 10 feet tall. Someone took a picture and later it ended up in a magazine article. The Nidorans were becoming quite the speedsters, and after learning how to tackle from Bulbasaur, they were also learning how to take on opponents much bigger than them. I taught Pidgey to peck and use his talons, and not just to rely on gust or flying moves. In the evening, I had some time to train with my main fighting team. Then afterwards, I spent some time testing some theories out. With Pokémon having such amazing inherent abilities, it seemed like such a missed opportunity to not experiment to see if they could be used for more practical, non-fighting purposes. I had Bulbasaur grab things, hold onto trees and swing himself, roping his vines together to make it thicker and stronger, etc. He could climb tall trees by wrapping his vines around a branch, lifting himself up to it, then repeating the process. Kinda useful if I wanted to hide my bag high up in the tree or something, I dunno. He could even lift me with his vines, although he wasn't quite strong enough to do so with ease. I got half a foot above the ground before Bulby gave up. With smaller Pokémon, he had no problems. Cutting down apples with his razor leaf was a breeze. With Charmander, I tried different things to make his flames stronger, adding accelerants, feeding him different foods, etc. It seems like the better his physical condition, the stronger his flame. His concentration increased and he learned to control his flame better. I even cooked instant ramen over it. I could definitely survive in the wild. His claws were also really sharp, as I've talked about before. It seemed like every time he sharpened them, they grew out to be stronger than before. Squirtle obviously was the best when he was near or in a body of water. It turns out, like other water-type Pokémon, Squirtle is able to distill water to make it clean enough to drink. I wasn't brave enough to try this, though. His water gun was becoming stronger, more accurate, and prolonged. He can stay below water for long periods of time without coming up, and could even hear me if he wasn't diving too deeply. He could easily ambush anyone walking nearby when he was underwater. One of my theories was also that HMs were a BS game mechanic and wouldn't exist in this world. I told Charmander to cut down small branches, and he did it with ease. Bulbasaur couldn't move a large fallen trunk, there were no large boulders to test, but I could see that once he evolved and became stronger, it would be easy for him. He could also just lean into it with his massive body, as Venusaur, I presumed. We found a pond deep enough for me to swim in, so I tried holding on to Squirtle's shell, but he wasn't strong enough to carry my weight and kept on sinking. A similar issue with Pidgey, who tried to lift me by grabbing a sturdy stick I was holding above my head, but obviously he couldn't generate enough lift to take me off the ground. So obviously, cutting, strength, surf, and fly were all inherent abilities of Pokémon, but their present physiology and lack of strength was what was stopping them, and not the lack of knowledge. The next day I went back to the gym, and there was already a crowd. When they saw me, they gathered around me. The ones I've already defeated demanded a rematch, and the ones that haven't seen me battle couldn't believe that a little guy like me destroyed all of the older trainers. I made more money during the next hour. I didn't even need to go back to the Pokémon Center because I kept on winning potions from battles that I used on my Pokémon because I couldn't carry them anyways. Some of the trainers even ran to the Pokémon Center and came back to challenge me again, which I accepted for free money. The biggest gain was winning a gym leader challenge ticket that was scheduled for the next available date, the day after tomorrow. It came from this especially cocky dude that had a Nidorino. He was able to use the relatively stronger Pokémon to defeat the other local trainers, so he had every reason to believe he'd beat me. "There's no way you can defeat my Nidorino," he said. "Let's go, 1 versus 1. We agreed to use only one Pokémon each, and no items. He must have expected me to use one of my starters, which are my strongest Pokémon, let's be real. So the expression of genuine surprise and massive insult on his face was a pleasure to see when I whipped out my hardened Metapod from my pocket. I had Metapod hardened multiple times, and the dude had Nidorino try tackling it first, then charging head-on with his horn until the poor Pokémon's horn broke off. I don't think he knew that on the previous night, I had my Pokémon take turns using Metapod as a punching bag for hours. The Nidorino had no chance. The other trainers stopped challenging me after this. I spent the rest of the time leading up to the gym leader battle training my Pokémon and getting them prepared for the battle. Hey, we have a Patreon chock full of NSFW content. Audios, GIFs, sauces, captions and more in our Patreon. Most of the audios are free, however, everything else will cost you. I want to grow Story into an actual brand business. An actual animation, publishing, movie studio. So if even you follow our Patreon for free, it'll really help out. Episode 15, Pewter City Gym, Part 4. No one challenged to a battle on the day of the gym leader battle. They all knew I'd turn them down anyways. I went in the gym, checked in with the receptionist, and prepared for my battle in the locker room. Similar to the coach battle, today's contest was limited to me using 3 Pokémon, and Brock using up to 2. No items were allowed. Refer to my previous narrative for the other details. After a few minutes, a staff member came to escort me and told me to stand on a platform in a small room. "Keep your arms and legs inside," she said. I was just about to ask inside what when the platform started to rise, like an elevator. It was very Hunger Games-esque. I came up to the sound of cheering and loud spectator noises. It wasn't a full blown-out crowd like it was in the anime, but there was a good number of spectators in the seats. Most of them were Brock fans, of course. There were, however, a fair number of people that were looking at me. They weren't cheering at all, but were studying me with something akin to antagonism. Or fear. I noticed immediately that the boundaries of the battlefield were significantly bigger than the coach battles. It was like those middle school PE classes when your teacher uses the whole game instead of half the gym, you know? This felt more like an entire basketball court, official NBA size, but slightly wider. Brock was already standing at his end of the trainer zone, arms crossed and with a confident smile. Judging by his smile, he seemed much more humble than his coaches. The referee announcer didn't waste her time. Over the PA system, her voice rang out. "This is an official Pokémon League battle between Pewter City Gym leader Brock and a challenger. Brock will use up to 2 Pokémon, and the challenger is allowed to use up to 3. No items are allowed during battle. So on and so forth. Same as before. Start the battle. Go, Geodude! Brock shouted, throwing his Pokeball. A Geodude came out. He looked different from all the other Geodudes I've faced in the past few days. It was only slightly bigger than the others, but seemed much more focused and ready. Its eyes were sharp. I could definitely tell that it was more battle-hardened and well-trained. By the way, a Geodude is a weird Pokemon. He just kinda floats in the air. I honestly think he should be part flying type. Let's go, Bulby! I brought out my boy. Geodude, use Tackle! Brock shouted. Bulbasaur stood still, waiting for Geodude to reach his maximum velocity, then moved out the way at the last possible second, before contact was made. Geodude went flying past Bulbasaur, and was about to decelerate when Bulbasaur pushed him in the same direction with his vines. Geodude went crashing into the ground really hard. Imagine if someone was committed to full-speed attacking you. Don't try this at home, but instead of letting him hit you, you move out of the way and push their back. His original velocity and the velocity of your push gets added into the same direction, and he goes high-fiving the pavement with his face. There were sympathetic oohs from the crowd, the kind you say when you just witness someone faceplant and it looks painful. Geodude, get back up before Bulbasaur attacks you, huh? I think everyone in the building expected Bulbasaur to not give Geodude any time to recover. Geodude was visibly hurt, as evidenced by his wincing, but when he got back up, Bulbasaur was totally ignoring him. Instead, Bulbasaur was standing at a particular spot of the battlefield, releasing a bunch of leech seed spores from his bulb. Once he was done, he moved on to another part of the field, doing the same thing. Geodude was confused, and floated still. And I didn't even use confusion, HA. Brock was equally confused, and he didn't know what to do in this situation. I'm sure the usual challengers he faced had their Pokémon go straight into full combat. In this case, Brock's Pokémon had much more experience dealing with this kind of situation, and had higher defensive skills and abilities. Why fight your enemy on his terms? Bulby was done with leech seeding 3 of the 4 predetermined spots when Brock finally snapped out of it. Geodude, don't let the seeds hit you. Geodude floated out of the way, and when Bulby went running to the last spot, coincidentally towards Geodude's direction, the rock Pokémon actually moved away from him. Bulbasaur leech seeded the last of the spots that we planned on. Have you ever played Harvest Moon, the video game? You know how you have your character stand in the middle of the 3x3 area and seed the area? Imagine that's what Bulbasaur did, covering the entire field with leech seeds. Geodude, good job, none of the seeds hit you, ha. Brock smiled. Bulbasaur looks tired, tackling again. It was true. The battlefield had been quite big, and despite the special training I did with Bulbasaur, covering the surface area of such a big space with leech seeds made Bulbasaur tired. Look, Geodude can float over the seeds. I heard one spectator shout from the stands. Haha, what a bad play. Another critiqued my strategy. Oh no, in faint panic, I recalled Bulbasaur into his Pokeball safely. Go, Charmander! I shouted. Charmander immediately started to sprint towards Geodude. Geodude, watch out for his flame! Brock shouted. Charmander started to whip his flame towards Geodude. Dodge and counter, Geodude! Brock shouted. Geodude floated over to evade where Charmander's tail was projected to go, when Charmander suddenly stopped the attack and spun the other way, swiping at Geodude's eyes with his claws. Since Geodude was already moving out of the way of the tail, the direction of his movement was telegraphed. It was easy for Charmander to land the critical hit. Geodude could not open his left eye. Strafe 90 right, combo 42. I said. Brock heard my instructions to Charmander, but he couldn't react because he had no idea what I was talking about. It was one of the funniest things in this Pokémon world that trainers would depend on verbal commands without secret codes. Charmander quickly knocked out Geodude by always turning towards Geodude's left side, thereby always being in the blind spot. Charmander's flurry of claw jabs and hooks were too much for Geodude. At one of the punches, he couldn't get up from the ground. The crowd became silent, incredulous at what they'd just seen. Geodude is unable to battle. Brock will use his second and last Pokémon. The referee shouted. Let's do this, Onix. Brock brought out his main Pokémon. Whoa! There were shouts and cheers from the crowd. It's the Onix, an especially avid fan commented. It was a particularly strong-looking Onix, slightly darker in color than all the other Onixes that I'd later see in the future as well. Later I heard that it was the leader of a den of Onixes that lived in the heart of Empty Moon. Brock had gone and battled for 2 days before finally being about to catch him. He almost never uses this Onix in public, another fan shouted, excited. So from what I gathered, this was Brock's special Onix that he almost never uses for gym battles, because he never had to. He must have changed his selection of Onix after seeing how Charmander defeated Geodude with ease. Alan told me this might happen when I talked to him on the night before, when I told him I was going to finally battle Brock. You know the gym leaders aren't really using their best team, right? Alan said. I didn't say anything, because it was different from the games. In the games, the gym battles get progressively harder, in terms of gym Pokémon levels and stats, because it takes into account the progression of the player. You start with Pewter City, and you train and get strong enough to eventually defeat Elite Four. But not every real Pokémon trainer starts from Pallet Town like I did. Some are born in different towns and might start there. It didn't make sense that their gyms would be much harder to earn a badge from. When you register with the reception, they check how many badges you have, and the gym leaders go easy or harder on you depending on your achievements to date, Alan explained. No, you can't lie, because they check your progress at the Pokémon League anyways. You are registered under your own unique identity. So back to Brock, he had prepared one of his not-so-hard Geodude and Onix team, but after seeing how I dealt with Geodude, he changed his plans and sent out one of his best Pokémon, this darker Onix. It seemed longer and harder than the others. Onix, body slam. Brock shouted. The giant rock snake put all of his weight on his tail, raised his head torso really high in the air, then came slamming down towards where Charmander was standing. It happened in the blink of an eye, and if it wasn't for my nonverbal commands, Charmander might not have been able to dodge it. Body slam? It was more like just slamming down with his body. It was a brutal attack. As previously instructed, Charmander started running towards Onix's eyes, but he had a lot of ground to cover due to the sheer size of the rock-hard snake. Come back up for another one, Brock shouted. Before Charmander could even get near his face, Onix raised himself again. Charmander was suddenly without a target, as Onix's tail was all the way at the end of the field. By the time Charmander could get there, the second slam would fall down. Click B, pattern 8. I shouted, and Charmander immediately went to the corner of the field, to my right. As Onix came crashing down, Charmander had already been in a sprint to the other corner to my left. Onix tried to change the direction, but of course he couldn't. You try standing on your mattress, start falling down face first, then try to change the direction mid-fall. When Charmander was clear of where Onix would land, he immediately jumped towards me. The crowd gasped and Brock's eyes widened a bit at Charmander's supposedly dumb move of going out of bounds. But I held up my Pokeball just in time to recall my Pokémon. While this was happening, Onix suddenly screeched in pain. Episode 16, Pewter City Gym, Part 5. Everyone, including Brock and the referee, were so gobsmacked by Charmander launching himself out of bounds towards me that they all missed me throwing out a different Pokeball as I was recalling Charmander. I had hurled this other Pokeball above Onix's head as hard as my 10-year-old body could. Because Charmander had been near me, Onyx's head landed near me as well. I had felt the impact of the slam create the massive vibrations beneath my feet. I don't want to think about what would have happened to Charmander if he was unable to dodge the attack. Anyways, from this other Pokeball, Squirtle had come out, midair, above Onyx's head. Since Onyx just landed on the ground and couldn't get back up immediately, he was a sitting duck, sitting rock snake, for Squirtle's water gun. Try to soak up as much as you can, Squirtle, I had said, just an hour before, in the bathtub at my bed and breakfast. He had comically inflated, having soaked up water to his limits. His little body bloated up like a water balloon. His face was like a big puffer fish. My Pidgey had collapsed from laughing. What's that? Oh no, don't worry about being unable to walk, Squirtle, I had told him. When you come out of the Pokeball, you'll be in the right place. Just unload about half of the water. And so it was. After an hour, Squirtle had a free shot of water gun directly towards Onyx's eyes. This is what I tell my Pokemon to aim for unless otherwise instructed. Gravity did its work as well, and the water did its damage. Onyx! Brock shouted in concern as the big rock snake raised its body and writhed in the air, in pain. Squirtle was no longer on the ground. He had shrunk down to his regular size and was ready for battle, which was still not over. Although he had taken a water gun to the face, Onyx was still able to battle, and had raised his head towards the ceiling. From this angle, there was no way Squirtle's water gun would reach Onyx's face. Next phase, Squirtle, I said. Squirtle started running towards Onyx, who was still standing up on his tail. Keep your head covered, Onyx, Brock said, and as Squirtle used water gun as close to an upwards 90 degrees angle as he could, the water made contact with Onyx's body only. It did some damage, but the big Onyx could still take it. Onyx, tail swipe and then dive, Brock shouted. Onyx swung his massive tail across the ground, and Squirtle had to jump as high as he could to dodge it. As he did, Onyx dived into the ground, burrowing his enormous body out of sight somewhere under the battlefield. It was explained to me later that a certain space beneath and above the battlefield is considered fair battle boundaries. As long as the burrowing or flying Pokémon wasn't just wasting time, it was accepted as a fair battle strategy. It seems like you know about Pokémon types, Brock said to me. OMG, Brock is doing the talk. You only see it in anime or movies, where the opponent spends time explaining stuff to the MC and then gets owned. Oh, Brock, not you too. You may have learned that water-type Pokémon have a natural advantage over rock types, and I'll give it to you that the first attack was very effective. But now that Onyx is underground, there's nothing much you can do. Brock smiled. To be fair, it wasn't a cocky smile. Perhaps a smile of what ya gon do next? What's Squirtle doing? One spectator asked. Everyone was collectively confused once again, seeing how Squirtle gave zero attention to Onyx somewhere under the ground. Instead, he was running around the entire battlefield in the optimum route, covering every square inch of water, which he was spraying like a fountain. It was like the shower mode on your garden hose. Satisfied that his job was done, Squirtle gave me a nod, and then I switched him out with Bulbasaur again. Having recovered decently in the Pokeball, Bulby now tried to sense Onyx's subterraneous movements using his forepaws flat on the ground. Ha! Brock said, are you trying to feel the tremors to detect where Onyx will strike from? That only works if he's the only thing that vibrates. But what if the entire ground shakes? I'm not sure if it was Brock's personality or powers that be that was making Brock start the talk, but he sure was going off. In any case, Brock was right. The entire ground was shaking, making it difficult for Bulbasaur to detect where Onyx was going to strike from. Bulbasaur would have been in a lot of trouble, if that's what he was trying to do. Instead, Bulby had his vines out, touching two corners of the battlefield with it. Onyx came out of the ground just below Bulbasaur, knocking him up high in the air. It really was a devastating technique, I have to give it to Brock. Everyone gasped in shock and surprise as Bulbasaur was visibly hurt, wincing. "You've activated my trap card," I thought in my head. It was too cheesy to say out loud. The momentum of the strike knocked Bulbasaur high into the air, but because he was anchored down to the ground, he flew off on a 45-degree angle, then came down underneath Onix. Think of throwing a tennis ball that's tied down on top of a flagpole, then throwing it up at an angle. It'll come swinging back around, right? Oh, you want to know how Bulbasaur was able to grab the ground with his vines, right? 'Cause that's not possible? You're right. He didn't grab the ground. He grabbed the net of leech seeds that he had thrown out earlier that was harmlessly lying on the ground, until Squirtle had gone around watering all of them just a few minutes before. Activated by the water, the seeds had grown and started growing, covering the ground like ivy plants on walls. But unlike regular ivy, the leech seeds grew out into really strong vines, connecting with each other and creating a veritable web of plants. It was these vines that Bulbasaur had grabbed onto, and now that he had come swinging around under Onix, who was still in the air. Bulby shot out 2 more vines and grabbed the other 2 corners of the web. So picture this, a giant web of leech seed vines that was roughly rectangular in shape, the corners of which were secured by Bulbasaur as if he had a parachute over his head. And between Bulbasaur and this deadly parachute was poor Onix. He had no chance. "Reel him in, Bulby!" I shouted. Onix was in the air and he was still going upwards. There was nothing he could do except to faceplant into the leech seed web. All Bulbasaur had to do was literally just attract his vines that were holding on to the 4 corners. They folded nicely and then entangled all over Onix. Bulbasaur didn't even have to pull Onix down, he wasn't strong enough to do this yet anyways, since gravity took care of the whole thing. Onix came crashing down, and then the leech seeds started to, well, leech. He was like a snake caught in a web that he couldn't get out of. There was a faint green glow over the web of the leech seed vines, and you could see that Onix was in pain like he was getting tasered. The more he wiggled, the tighter the webs became. Meanwhile, Bulbasaur was being recharged by Onix's energy. I saw Bulbasaur's bulb open a bit with a glowing light inside when. "Enough!" Brock shouted. "You win. Brock has forfeited. The challenger wins." The announcer over the PA shouted. It was my first gym win. I honestly remember very little of what happened after the victory against Brock. I do remember that he came over to shake my hand. "You're going to go far, kid," he said, even though he was only 15 years old himself. The crowd was still much shocked over what they had seen, and looked at me with awe and suspicion. I was sus. Brock took me into a private room and there was a bit of paperwork I had to sign. Then I got the boulder badge. The octagonal edges glistened with a pleasant gray chrome glint when I held it at different angles of the light. It had a unique identifying serial code on the back, and Brock explained that it was to be registered under my name, Ash Ketchum. "Can I also register an alias?" I asked. "Sure," Brock said. "What will it be?" "Red," I said. "I'll go by Red." Episode 17, Route 3. Brock told me that because I had earned the boulder badge, I could sign up to receive training from him. "It seems that you're very skilled as a trainer already," he said. "But I could still offer some insights." So I came back the day after and Brock showed me some skills and training exercises my Pokémon could do to increase defensive techniques. It was invaluable knowledge. By the end, it seemed even my little guys could take some rough tackles, but most importantly, my main fighting group was tankier than before. Halfway through the training, my Weedle evolved into Kakuna, and together with Metapod, served nicely as punching bags. Don't worry, I kept an eye on them so they weren't being too abused. There was still plenty of daylight after training with Brock, so I grabbed all my stuff, got my team in tip-top shape, and started for Route 3. On the way, I went to the local Pokemart and got a bunch of empty Pokeballs. I also had the foresight to grab an additional bag for all these extra Pokeballs. I was going to catch a lot of new Pokémon. The Pokemart, like the Pokémon Center, was a fun place to browse because there were so many merchandise that were unique to this world, and I had never seen them before. There was a lot of Pokémon food, medicine, and accessories. People enjoyed dressing up their Pokémon with clothes or pins, etc. There were also Pokémon toothbrushes, wet wipes, and other things that one might associate with pets and livestock. It really confirmed the idea that they were living, breathing beings that I needed to take care of. The Pokemart was also a place for people's stuff. They had magazines on Pokémon trivia, training tips, and latest Pokémon League news. Every monthly issue also published names of trainers who earned which badges as well. Some articles of clothing, the most notable of which was a magnetic belt that held Pokeballs quite securely. I purchased one to more conveniently access my Pokémon. There was also camping gear, and I grabbed a good flashlight for the upcoming empty moon trip. Snacks and ready-to-eat meal packages were the best at the local Pokemart. It had a whole array of different types of food, all quite delicious and easy to prepare, usually by adding boiling water, which was easy to take care of with Squirtle and Charmander. "Is there anything else we could get for you?" the store cashier asked. Oh yes, I remembered. Do you guys have earplugs for people? And for Pokémon? Thusly prepared for the next leg of the journey, I set out to Route 3, which, I judged, would take about 3 hours to hike all the way through. And possibly more if I took my time to battle and catch new Pokémon. On the route, I felt that the trainers were significantly better than those I faced by the Pewter City gym. And I think this was likely a result of these trainers being the ones who have also beaten Brock, or at least his coaches. For those who haven't even beaten the coach, they usually stuck in town to get stronger before being out on the official routes. Most of these trainers were polite and gracious in their defeat. There was a particularly mean girl, though, who just wouldn't handle it. "You cheated!" she yelled. I'm not even sure how I could have cheated having my Pidgey destroy her Rattata with one gust move. "You're so weak." Now she turned to her Rattata, quivering in fear of her. "You're useless." She started kicking dirt at her Rattata. Nasty little brat, this girl. I did tell her to stop and advised her to treat her Pokémon with kindness, but unfortunately, I could not get her to change her ways. This was just one of the realities of this world. One particularly good trainer had a Zubat that used supersonic rays on Charmander, who was not entirely confused, but got disoriented due to his advanced sense of hearing. It was a good thing that Zubat was too weak to follow up with a finishing move. "Wow, tough Charmander," the big bearded guy said, after the fight. "That move knocked out all the other Pokémon." He was a nice teddy bear of a man who marked down on my interior map of Empty Moon where he caught his Zubat. I later caught one there. Route 3 offered species of Pokémon that I hadn't seen in Viridian and Pewter. It gave me and my Pokémon opportunities to create new strategies. Spearow and Mankey were two especially aggressive Pokémon that came after me. Or the food in my backpack, rather. I caught one each after knocking them out with Squirtle. He was getting better with conserving water within his body, and his water gun was becoming stronger. Once I had caught them, they were both obedient and subdued. Once, walking along Route 3, I caught up to my Rattata that I told to walk ahead of me. He was unhurt, but was knocked out on the ground. Something had put it to sleep. I quickly reached into my pocket for earplugs and plugged my ears. I also put Rattata back into his Pokeball and brought out Bulbasaur, who already had his earplugs in. The Jigglypuff was just chilling behind a bunch of bushes. I must have made more noise than I wanted, because my efforts to sneak behind her didn't work. She immediately turned towards me and Bulbasaur and started to sing. The effect was powerful, even with the earplugs on. You just feel this invisible force that presses down on your mind and body, trying to get it to sleep. Good thing I had one Nidoran bite my ankle and the other bite Bulbasaur's, then they fell asleep. The pain kept me and Bulbasaur awake long enough for the vine whip to connect with the Jigglypuff. The constriction of the vines around her body made it impossible for her to sing any more. A couple of slams on the ground, and she was easily caught. And finally, I ran into a small Pikachu. She was smaller than average, according to my Pokédex, so I was thinking maybe I would pass on her for a bigger one I saw next. Then the Pikachu used Thundershock and I changed my mind. You don't see the electric wave as much as feel it in the air. It was hard to believe the power that came out of this little Pikachu. She was a feisty one that put up a fight. She stood her ground and kept on sending out electric moves even as she started growing tired. She kept on growling. I considered using Charmander or Bulbasaur, but I decided to take a different approach. Jigglypuff was more than happy to sing her heart out and the Pikachu fell asleep. I battled half a dozen more trainers the rest of the way and picked up some more tips, items, and money. It was with this growing team and wealth I finally reached the Pokémon Center at the base of Empty Moon entrance and got a room to rest up for the night. Episode 18 Metric Tons Moon, Part 1. The majority of people I met in the common areas of the Pokémon Center were understandably people who were planning to go through Empty Moon towards Cerulean City. There were small kiosks that offered guided tours of the natural wonders of the mountain caves. I also learned that unlike the games, the main cave path was well maintained and well lit with electricity, so that safe passage was quite guaranteed. The issue is that there are hundreds of side branches that lead to other cave paths. And each of these branches off into dozens and dozens more, and so in effect you have a fractal of potentially infinite caves that are impossible to fully explore and map out. Empty Moon didn't get its name for no reason. It was a humongous piece of rock. Legends say that it is the dead remains of a massive ancient Pokémon god, but no way for anyone to verify this. Anyways, the safe passage was to take an 8-hour hike, and I wasn't about to pass by my chance to explore the crevices of the caves. I purchased a map of the main passages that have been explored, and also a small beacon machine not unlike GPS. The machine will keep a track of the path you took, the salesman demonstrated. Most of the paths nearby have been explored, as you can see. If you press this button, in the case of an emergency, others can see you on their machines and could come to your aid. So I started off on the main path for about an hour, with a small group of people. Then slipped out into the place where the bearded men showed me I could catch a Zubat. They're not so populous on the main path, due to their sensitivity of light. In this world, it was so much more convenient to have my Pokémon out of their Pokeballs than to keep them confined. There was no reason, legal or otherwise, for me to keep all of them in my Pokeball, except to bring my bigger Pokémon, which I caught later, through small rooms, etc. This is why I had my Rattata and Nidorans out to scout out ahead, and Mankey was on my shoulders, holding my flashlight with his tail. Charmander was guarding the rear, just in case there were wild Pokémon stalking us to steal my food. I used all my Pokémon, using their naturally given abilities here in the wild. They loved it. I spent a good 2 to 3 hours in the first branch I went into, letting my Pokémon tell me where to find wild ones. Their perception, hearing, sense of smell, were so much better than mine, so why would I waste my time trying to track wild Pokémon myself, right? I caught a Geodude of my own, and dude, did he love to eat rocks, and a Paras, whose ability to find edible wild mushrooms meant that I could easily find a good source of nutrition out in the wild. We all ate a snack and took a nap in a small cave with 3 sides covered by the walls. You can't sneak up on me, except for Pidgey and Spearow who I left on sentry duty. They surprisingly got along well. Afterwards I returned to the main path and went down another hour or so, then ventured off into another side branch passage. I had already decided that my main goal on this trip was to catch as many new Pokémon as possible and continue my training regiment with my main fighting team. I set some of Bulby's leaves on fire with Charmander's fire and threw it down a burrow hole, smoking a sandshrew out of its hiding spot. I caught it easily after my rat crew, Rattata and Nidorans, gave him a 3-way tackle. Don't worry, I used a potion on him afterwards. All this time, I had been looking for an onyx. Due to its large size, it doesn't really inhabit the small passages that I've been exploring. I told my Zubat to use his echolocation to find larger passages or large, empty spaces. No luck. I didn't want to go too deep into the unexplored paths, so I doubled back to the main passage. At the halfway point of the main passage, between Route 3 and Route 4 entrances, there is a small marketplace and some shacks at which you can rent a bunk. Due to the size of Empty Moon and its tourist attractions, namely being able to catch certain Pokémon, these designated rest areas were created. Pokémon battles were banned here, due to there being no Pokémon centers nearby. There was running water and street food, cave food, vendors that served hot and fresh food. Since I had not been able to hike and camp out like this in my previous life due to my ill health, this was something I particularly enjoyed. I still didn't know how this afterlife was possible or if it was all real, but as long as I was in this new reality, I was going to enjoy it to the fullest. The co-ed bunk bedrooms were a good place to exchange information about where to find Pokémon in Empty Moon. Luckily, no one here seemed to know my feats back in Pewter, so I was not bothered by any of them. I did have to pretend, however, that I hadn't caught a Zubat, a Paras, a Geodude, and a Sandshrew in the past 4 hours, so that none of them would pester me with a million questions. One of the trainers, however, did see a Clefairy. She had everyone's attention. I know a lot of people claim to have seen a Clefairy, she said. But I have proof. Look at this picture. It was blurry and taken from far away, but it still showed the silhouette of the pink body of a Clefairy and her brown-tipped ears. It was undeniable. Whoa, a trainer shouted in envy. Where did you see it? Another asked. I was also listening in carefully. Ha! Trade secrets, yo, the girl said. It's gonna cost each of you if you want to get the info. Clever girl. She named a price that was at the high end of reasonable, and when everyone, including me, paid up, sent us a GPS location to our trackers. It was off into one of the passages that lead upwards. Since Clefairies and Clefables were known to enjoy moonlight, it made sense. Perhaps the one she saw was a stray that ventured down near the main path. Once everyone went back to their bunks, satisfied with the GPS locations, I saw the girl walk out of the room, so I followed her. She was at one of the store vendors, looking alternatively at a bunch of Pokémon potions, Pokémon food, and ready-made meals for people. She was rubbing her stomach, trying to appease the pangs of hunger. She looked at the money from the trainers. It was not little, but it wasn't enough to get everything. Everything in the Empty Moon passage was more expensive than in the towns, because they've been marked up with location premium. It was difficult to bring everything into this camp. I reached in front of her to grab 4 potions, a medium pack of Pokémon food, and a bento box. She turned to look at me in surprise. At this point, I'd made so much money from all the Pokémon battles I'd won easily with my overpowered team. I paid for the goods, and the vendor put them in a plastic bag. I held it out in front of her, but didn't say anything. I already told you where I saw the Clefairy, she said angrily. I know. I don't need your charity, she said, trembling with anger. I know, I said. Tears formed in her eyes, that still looked at me with suspicion and anger. Take it. Your Pokémon need it, and you shouldn't have to decide between you and them. She didn't take it, but couldn't turn it down either. She started crying silently, her face facing the ground and covered by her long black hair. I took the plastic bag and put it into her hand. It closed over it. I didn't say anything and walked away. I turned back and saw her still crying with the bag firmly held in hand. This is how I met my second best friend in this Pokémon world. Episode 19 Metric Tons Moon, Part 2. I purposely got up earlier than the others in the bunk room and quietly snuck out in the dark. I arrived at the GPS location and saw the rock formation as I had seen in the blurry photo of the Clefairy. My Charmander growled at something behind me. It was the girl from yesterday, shyly hugging her arms. She didn't say anything. There was an Oddish at her feet. It looked up at her with loving eyes. It was clear to see how the girl treated her Pokémon. Am I in the right place? I broke the awkward silence. Yeah. She seemed relieved that I said something to her first. She awkwardly walked past me with a blushing red face. Follow me, she pointed at a particular passage that branched off upwards. I'm Irina, by the way, she introduced herself. You can call me Red. We walked upwards with my Mankey guiding the way with my flashlight. The path flattened out a bit, but then we came to a small hole that we couldn't fit through. I followed the Clefairy and couldn't go any further, she explained. I looked inside with the flashlight and it seemed possible for us to walk on the other side. Geodude, snack time, he was happy to munch down the rocks, making the hole big enough for us to squeeze through. As Geodude was munching, the girl said something softly, too quietly for me to hear. Sorry, what's that? Thank you, she said. For last night. Don't worry about it. My Oddish, she said. She's okay now, but it was pretty bad. Her Oddish peeked at me with curiosity from behind her legs. I waved hi and she hid behind them again. A shy one also. Like trainer, like Pokémon, I guess. What happened? I asked. So apparently there were groups of bullies that broke the no-battle rules near the main safe pathway of Empty Moon. They were always in pairs, and they attacked weak-looking trainers only minutes after diverging from the main pathway. They ambushed trainers and mugged them. I had a group of 3 others that I was traveling to Pewter City with, she said. But they had to rush back to Cerulean to go to the Pokémon Center. Why didn't you go back with them? My pendant. She started to tear up again. It's a family heirloom. They had ripped it from her neck even as they took everything of monetary value. I got the impression that these weren't just bullies on the road. This was something more criminal. I listened to her in silence as she cried a bit more. Once Geodude made a big enough pathway, we walked up the incline together, even though we hadn't agreed out loud to do so. It was clear to see, both visually and on the GPS tracker, that this passage had never been explored by people. It was most likely because of the narrow entrance, but it had something to do with the uphill pathway as well. As I mentioned before, the caves in Empty Moon branch off into dozens of side branches, which each path off into the next dozen, and so forth, so that it was impossible for all of them to be explored. So which ones did those brave enough to venture from the main safe pathway explore? The ones that were easiest to access. The wides, the closest, the least winding, and flattest paths were the ones people took. This one didn't fit any of those criteria. Clefairies and Clefables were known to shy away from people, and it was most likely that these paths would lead to their natural habitat. We eventually came to a dead end, but noticed a hole directly above us, leading to another level. I threw a Pokeball straight up into the hole, and it landed on the floor above. My Mankey came out of it. Then I had my Pidgey take one end of the rope I had purchased back at the Route 3 Pokémon Center and fly it up to Mankey, who fastened it securely to a sturdy boulder protruding from the ground. It was difficult for a bunch of kids like me and Irina, who turned out to be 11, to climb up the rope, but with some help from Bulbasaur's vines and floating Geodude, we made it up safely. We had come up to another cave path, and we marked it on our GPS tracker, just in case. We felt a draft of air coming from one direction, which meant that it led outdoors. We decided to head that way. About half an hour later, we saw flickers of daylight and emerged into a large, semi-spherical space. The ceiling was at least 50 feet high and there was a circular hole at the top, like a skylight. Directly below it, on the ground in front of us, was a flat cylindrical space, not unlike an altar. No. A dance floor? Whatever it was, it obviously carried a significance to those who lived here. There were little cave entrances at different levels all around the dome that probably branched out to private living quarters. And this was the large common area. "Look, over there," Irina whispered, pointing at one of these holes. "A clefairy." It was poking its head out, looking around. It was cautious. No, it was afraid. Afraid? Of what? Irina and I were still hidden in the shadows of the corridor we were in, and the clefairy wasn't looking at us. It was looking at a gigantic hole in the middle of the wall, on the opposite side of where Irene and I poked our heads out. We had not noticed it before, our attention caught by the majesty of this place. But now we saw it, a large hole about 8 feet high, and judging by the rubble by the entrance that contrasted with the overall neatness of this place, was created by intruders. Then we heard voices and dark shadows emerging from this hole. "How many did we get?" a man said to another figure. 28, a woman answered. "That's pretty good, but someone said they saw one still hiding here," the man said. "Best we get it before reporting back to the boss." They emerged into the daylight coming through the skylight, and I saw that they were wearing black uniforms, complete with gray boots, gray gloves, and a red capital R on their chest. Ha ha ha, it's Team Rocket. Of course, in the game, there was Team Rocket and Empty Moon, placed there as NPCs that provided experience to level up your Pokémon. To see their uniforms in real life, however, was just too funny. Imagine adults, these two looked like they were in their mid-20s, and later I saw people as old as 40s, with gray boots and gloves, with tight black overalls with a giant red R on it. Still, I wasn't going to underestimate anyone in this world, and thought it would be prudent to maintain stealth. I turned to communicate this to Irina, and saw her trembling. It wasn't fear. It was anger. "Are you okay?" I whispered. I was praying she wouldn't go running out. "My pendant," she whispered under her breath and pointed at the girl Rocket. Even at this distance, I could see the pendant glistening in the sunlight with a mesmerizing green light. It was around the girl Rocket's neck, visible over her uniform. Oh no, I thought, and before I could stop her, Irina was already up and running out into the large dome area. The Rockets saw her immediately and were on guard. "Who are you?" the guy Rocket shouted. "It's you," the girl Rocket recognized her. "Back for more?" The Rockets were smirking at Irina and her Oddish. Oddish had a battle-ready angry face on, but the little guy was trembling in fear, probably in memory of what had happened in their last scuffle. The guy Rocket brought out a Grimer, and the girl Rocket brought out her Ekans. Ugh, why do the bad guys use Pokémon that are archetypically associated with negative things? Grimers and Ekanses need love, too. If I was alone and wanted to take the Rockets out, I would have flanked them and ambushed them from the shadows. But even though I wasn't obliged in any way, I wanted to protect Irina and her Oddish. They'd been through too much at the hand of these jerk Rockets. Even as I caught more and more Pokémon, I made sure I knew which Pokeball contained which, using a mice and play system. As Grimer and Ekans were ordered to attack Oddish, I reached for all the right Pokeballs and threw them out. Bulbasaur came out and grabbed Metapod and Kakuna with his vines, placing them directly in the way of the attack. Have you ever played PvZ? They were like the walnuts. Ekan's fangs connected with the super hard Metapod. The snake winced in pain and jumped back. Grimer's poisonous toxic body wasn't that dangerous yet, but whatever toxicity he had was absorbed well by the poison resistance of Kakuna. At the same time, I had Mankey and Geodude flank and position themselves above the Rockets. They started taking small stones and whipping them at their torsos. "The hospital, boys, not the morgue," I shouted at my stone throwers. I didn't want to murder anyone. Aiming rocks at their heads would be too dangerous. The Rockets were totally caught off guard. They had other Pokeball on their belts, but couldn't reach them because they had to use their arms to shield themselves from the rocks. Ah, the guy Rocket yelped in pain. Ouch, the girl Rocket yelled. Irina looked on at this scene with her jaws dropped. Oddish was hopping in place, excited and happy. She even kicked a pebble at her feet. It connected with the girl Rocket's nose, which started to bleed. The use of multiple Pokémon was hilarious in the wild. Without the one-at-a-time rule of the gyms and more courteous of battles, there was nothing to stop me from using as many Pokémon as I wanted. The only thing that was holding me back was my own multitasking ability and being able to remember what my Pokémon can do. I sent out Rattata, Nidoran, boy, Nidoran, girl, and Pikachu, my fastest and most agile team. I told them to sneak down the path the rockets had emerged from and report back if they saw backup. I didn't want a whole game of other rockets coming up. Without the rockets giving them direct commands, Ekans and Grimer looked around, baffled and indecisive. We give up. Stop, the rockets yelled. I held up a fist and the rock artillery team stopped. Bulbasaur still stood on guard with his dual shield formation. But the fight was over. The two rockets were on the ground, riding in too much pain to put up any resistance. Hey, we have a Patreon chock full of NSFW content. Audios, GIFs, sauces, captions and more in our Patreon. Most of the audios are free, however, everything else will cost you. I want to grow Story into an actual brand business. An actual animation, publishing, movie studio. So if even you follow our Patreon for free, it'll really help out.